Death walks slow in Wyoming winter, slow enough that you can watch it coming, feel every frozen breath steal the warmth from your bones, and know with absolute certainty that you won't outrun it. Lena Voss had maybe an hour left, maybe less. The blood on her hands had frozen solid, her feet were beyond feeling, and the storm that hunted her across these godforsaken plains showed no mercy. Then she saw it. Smoke, thin as a prayer, rising against the white fury. A cabin. One chance. If the man inside that door turned her away, she'd be dead before the sun thought about rising. If this story grabs you, stick with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lena's journey travels across this world. The wind screamed like something alive and furious. It tore across the Wyoming high plains with a violence that suggested personal vendetta, stripping heat from anything stupid enough to be caught outside, burying the landscape under wave after wave of driving snow. The kind of storm that old-timers would talk about for years afterward, shaking their heads over whiskey, recounting who made it through and who didn't. Lena Voss was rapidly joining the didn't category. She'd been walking for 3 hours, or maybe 4. Time had become as meaningless as direction in the whiteout conditions. Her left boot had split open somewhere around mile 2, and now freezing slush soaked through to her skin with every agonizing step. The makeshift bandage wrapped around her right hand, torn from the hem of her dress days ago, had frozen into a stiff, useless club. Blood had seeped through the fabric and crystallized into dark red ice. The bundle clutched against her chest contained everything she owned. A change of clothes so worn they were nearly transparent, a bone-handle knife with a blade she'd never had the courage to use on anything but rope, and a small leather pouch holding $3.47. A fortune once. Now just dead weight that might have been better left behind to buy her a few more minutes of strength. But Lena Voss didn't leave things behind anymore. She'd learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. Her legs buckled, and she went down hard into a snowdrift that swallowed her to the waist. For several seconds, she simply stayed there, the wind howling overhead, her body screaming for permission to quit. It would be easy. So easy. Just close her eyes, let the cold finish what it started, drift off into that final sleep that everyone said didn't hurt once you stopped fighting it. No. The thought came from somewhere deep, somewhere that hadn't been broken yet, despite everything that had happened. Despite the brothel in Cheyenne where Darius Kane had kept her locked in a gilded cage. Despite the things she'd endured in that place, the pieces of herself she'd traded for survival, the slow death of believing she was nothing more than property to be bought and sold. She'd run. 3 days ago, she'd finally run, and she hadn't come this far, hadn't stolen the horse that threw her after 2 hours, hadn't walked through 2 nights and a day in this frozen hell just to die within sight of salvation. Lena forced herself up, ice cascading from her shoulders, and focused on the smoke. It was real. She was almost certain. Not a hallucination conjured by a dying brain desperate for hope. The wind had cleared for just a moment, and she could see it more clearly now. A thin gray ribbon rising from beyond a low ridge, about 200 yards ahead. 200 yards. Might as well have been 200 miles. She started walking. Every step was a negotiation with her body. Her muscles had moved past pain into a dangerous numbness that she knew meant serious trouble. Frostbite, probably. She could lose toes, maybe the whole foot. If infection set in, and out here it always set in, she could lose a lot more than that. Doesn't matter. Reach the cabin first. Worry about keeping body parts later. The ridge seemed to retreat as she approached, some cruel trick of the storm and her failing vision. But she kept moving, one foot dragging in front of the other, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her lungs, her heart hammering against her ribs with an irregular rhythm that couldn't be healthy. When she finally crested the ridge, she almost sobbed with relief. The cabin sat in a small depression, partially sheltered from the worst of the wind by the surrounding terrain. It wasn't much. Rough-hewn logs, a single window glowing with warm yellow light, smoke rising steady from a stone chimney. But it was the most beautiful thing Lena had ever seen. A small barn stood about 30 yards from the main structure, and she could hear horses moving inside, their nervous whinnies barely audible over the storm. Someone lived here. Someone was home. The descent nearly killed her. The slope was steeper than it looked, and her numb feet couldn't find purchase on the ice-slicked ground. She slipped, slid, caught herself on rocks that tore through her gloves, kept going. 20 yards. 10. 5. She collapsed against the cabin door with a thud that surely carried inside. For a long moment, nothing happened. Lena pressed her ear against the rough wood, listening past the storm, past her own ragged breathing, trying to detect any sign of movement within. Maybe whoever lived here was asleep. Maybe they couldn't hear her over the wind. Maybe... The door opened so suddenly that she fell forward, catching herself on hands that screamed with pain, sprawling half inside across a threshold that meant the difference between life and death. She looked up. A man stood over her, and the first thing Lena registered was the rifle. It was a Winchester, probably .30-30, held with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. The barrel wasn't quite pointed at her, but it wasn't pointed away either. The second thing she registered was the eyes. They were the color of flint, hard and measuring, set in a weathered face that suggested he was somewhere in his late 30s. Dark hair, touched with gray at the temples. A jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains. He wore simple clothes, canvas work pants, a flannel shirt, suspenders. But there was nothing simple about the way he held himself. The coiled readiness that suggested violence was always an option. Please. The word came out as barely a whisper, her voice wrecked from screaming against the wind. Please, I'll die out here. The man's expression didn't change. Those flint-gray eyes traveled over her, taking in the frozen blood, the torn clothes, the desperate exhaustion written into every line of her body. Looking for something. Threat assessment, maybe. Or just calculating whether she was worth the trouble. How many following you? His voice was rough, like gravel in a tin cup, with the flat accent of someone who'd spent most of his life in wild country. None. Lena shook her head, trying to push herself up and failing. Nobody, I swear. People always swear. He glanced past her into the storm, scanning the darkness with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned not to trust easy answers. You wouldn't be the first to use a woman as bait. I'm not... Panic clawed at her throat. He was going to shut the door, going to leave her out here. Please, I'm alone. I've been alone for 3 days. I just need... How'd you hurt the hand? The question caught her off guard. What? Your hand. That's not a fresh wound. What happened? Lena looked down at the frozen bandage, trying to remember through the fog in her brain. Broken glass, window. When I... She stopped, some survival instinct warning her not to reveal too much. It doesn't matter. Please. For several more seconds, the man just stared at her, weighing, deciding. His finger rested along the trigger guard of the Winchester, not on the trigger itself, but close enough to matter. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. One night, he said flatly. Storm passes, you leave. We clear? Lena nodded so hard her vision swam. Yes, thank you. Save it. Get inside before you let all the heat out. She crawled over the threshold, her body responding to the warmth like a flower turning toward the sun. The cabin's interior was simple but well-maintained. A single large room with a stone fireplace against one wall, a bed in the corner, a small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a table with 2 chairs. Pelts hung on the walls, wolf, bear, cougar, and various tools were arranged with military precision on pegs and shelves. The door closed behind her with a solid thunk that cut off the storm's howl. The sudden silence was almost as overwhelming as the warmth. Don't move. Lena froze. The man circled around her, maintaining distance, the rifle still in hand. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness, watching, looking for the followers he still didn't quite believe weren't coming. What's your name? He asked, not turning around. Lena. Lena Voss. Where you from, Lena Voss? Cheyenne. Originally from... It doesn't matter, Cheyenne recently. Long way from Cheyenne. He finally turned from the window, those hard eyes fixing on her again. Wrong direction too, unless you were trying to freeze to death in the fastest way possible. I wasn't trying to... She stopped. What was the point? I got lost. The storm came up fast. Storms don't come up fast this time of year. You see them building for hours. He leaned the rifle against the wall, but Lena noticed it was still within easy reach. Try again. I did get lost, she insisted, some spark of defiance flickering through the exhaustion. I'm not a pathfinder. I'm not a whore. She barely stopped herself from saying it. I'm just trying to get somewhere safe. Ain't nowhere safe. The man moved to the stove, poured something from a pot into a tin cup. But some places are less dangerous than others. Drink this. Slow. He set the cup on the floor within her reach, then retreated to the far side of the cabin. Lena inched forward and picked it up with shaking hands. Broth. Venison, probably, with chunks of potato and onion. The smell alone almost made her weep. She took a sip. Heat flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. She took another, then another, forcing herself to go slow even though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. You got a name? She asked between sips, glancing up at her reluctant host. He'd settled into one of the chairs, positioned so he could watch both her and the door simultaneously. Caleb Rourke. Thank you, Mr. Rourke. Told you to save it. But his voice had lost some of its edge. You can't stay on the floor. Get up to the fire. Thaw out proper before you lose something permanent. Lena tried to stand and discovered her legs had other ideas. They folded under her like wet paper, and she went down hard on her knees. Caleb was moving before she fully registered falling, crossing the room in 3 long strides. But he stopped just short of touching her, and Lana saw something flicker across his face. Hesitation, maybe, or some old caution. She tried to push herself up again and failed. Just give me a minute. You're hypothermic, your body's shutting down. He reached out slowly, deliberately, giving her time to flinch away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gripped her arm, carefully she noticed, avoiding the injured hand, and helped her to her feet. Come on. He half carried her to the fireside, easing her down onto a low bench that radiated stored heat. Lena couldn't stop the small sound of relief that escaped her as warmth enveloped her body. Caleb knelt in front of her, all business now, and started unlacing her ruined boots. This is gonna hurt. I know. She'd been through enough Wyoming winters to understand what came next. He pulled off the first boot. Lena bit down on her lower lip hard enough to taste blood, but she didn't scream. The second boot was worse. When Caleb peeled away the frozen sock underneath, they both saw the damage. Her toes were bone white, the skin waxy and lifeless. Damn, Caleb muttered. He stood, moving to a cupboard and returning with a basin of water. Not warm, she could see it was barely above freezing. Put your feet in, slow. Shouldn't it be warm water? You want to lose the toes for sure. Use warm water. Cold first, let the tissue wake up gradual. He set the basin in front of her. Do it. Lena lowered her feet into the water. The sensation was indescribable. 1,000 needles driving into her flesh, pain so intense that stars burst across her vision. She gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles white, breathing through her teeth. That's good, Caleb said, watching her feet with a clinical eye. Pain means the nerves still work. Another few minutes out there and you'd be past feeling anything at all. He moved to the kitchen area, working with efficient, economical movements. Lena watched through eyes blurred with tears, trying to focus on anything other than the agony radiating from her feet. He was tall. She'd registered that initially, but now she could appreciate the full measure of it. Maybe 6'2", 6'3", broad through the shoulders in the way of men who did hard physical labor every day of their lives. His hands were scarred, she noticed, crisscrossed with the white lines of old injuries. Not a rancher, she decided. Wrong location for that. Too isolated, too high in the mountains. A trapper, maybe. That would explain the pelts on the walls, the solitary existence. You live here alone? The question escaped before she could think better of it. Caleb glanced back at her. Would it matter if I didn't? I suppose not. Yeah. Alone. He returned with another cup of broth and a plate containing 2 thick slices of bread smeared with butter. Eat. Then we deal with the hand. Lena accepted the food with trembling hands. The bread was fresh, baked today probably, or maybe yesterday. For some reason, that detail struck her as impossibly sad. This hard, solitary man baking bread in his lonely cabin, waiting out the storm with no one for company but his own thoughts. Just like you were alone. Just like you've always been alone. one way or another. She pushed the thought away and ate. The bread was good, dense and filling, the butter rich and real. Between bites, she studied Caleb as he moved around the cabin, checking the fire, adjusting the damper on the stove, performing the small rituals of a man accustomed to his own company. "Why'd you let me in?" she asked finally. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was flat, factual. "Because nobody deserves to freeze to death, even people running from something they probably earned." "I didn't earn. I don't care." Caleb turned to face her fully. "What you did or didn't do in Cheyenne ain't my business, but I'm not stupid and I'm not naive. Women don't run into storms like this unless what's behind them is worse than what's ahead. So whatever or whoever you're running from, you keep it away from my door. We clear?" Lena nodded slowly. "Clear." "Good. Now let's see that hand." She extended her right hand reluctantly. Caleb settled onto the bench beside her, maintaining a careful distance, she noted, and began unwrapping the frozen bandage. The fabric had stuck to the wound, and every millimeter he peeled away sent fresh jolts of pain up her arm. When the bandage finally came free, Lena heard Caleb's sharp intake of breath. The cut ran diagonally across her palm, deep enough that she could see the white of tendon beneath the dried blood. The edges were ragged, infected, and the skin around the wound had taken on an angry red color that spoke of serious trouble brewing. "How long ago?" Caleb asked quietly. 3 days? Maybe 4? Jesus. He stood abruptly, moving to a shelf and pulling down a battered wooden box. "This is infected. Bad. You could lose the hand if we don't clean it out proper. Will it hurt?" Caleb met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something other than hard suspicion in his expression. Something that might have been sympathy, carefully controlled. "Yeah, it's going to hurt like hell. You want whiskey first?" Lena shook her head. "No, I want to feel it. Need to know it's real." "Suit yourself." He returned with the box and a bottle of clear liquid that Lena suspected wasn't water. Setting everything on the bench between them, he opened the box to reveal basic medical supplies: bandages, thread, a needle, various bottles, and tins. "You know what you're doing?" Lena asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "Done it enough times, on myself mostly, but the principle's the same." Caleb selected a bottle and a clean cloth. "This is grain alcohol, medical grade. It'll clean the wound, but it's going to feel like I'm setting your hand on fire." "Okay. Hold still." He poured the alcohol over her palm. Lena's scream echoed off the cabin walls. She tried to jerk her hand back, but Caleb's grip was iron firm, holding her steady while he methodically cleaned the wound. The pain was everything he'd promised, and worse, a white-hot agony that consumed her entire awareness, turning the world into nothing but fire and suffering. "Almost done," Caleb said, his voice distant through the roaring in her ears. "Stay with me." He worked quickly, efficiently, cleaning out the infected tissue with ruthless precision. Lena felt tears streaming down her face, tasted blood where she'd bitten through her lip, but she didn't scream again. Some stubborn pride wouldn't let her. When he finally released her hand, she sagged forward, gasping. "Worst part's over." Caleb was already threading the needle. "Just stitches now." "Just stitches," Lena repeated numbly, watching him work. The needle pierced her flesh, drawing the ragged edges together with neat, practiced movements. It hurt, but it was a distant, manageable pain compared to the alcohol. 7 stitches. Caleb tied off the thread, cut it with his knife, then wrapped her hand in clean bandage. When he finished, he sat back, studying his work with a critical eye. "That should hold, long as you keep it clean and don't do anything stupid with it for the next week or 2. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me." Caleb stood, gathering up the medical supplies. "It's late. You need sleep more than anything else." Lena glanced at the single bed in the corner, then back at Caleb. A familiar dread coiled in her stomach, the understanding of what came next, what men always expected when they'd done something for a woman like her. "Where do you want me?" she asked quietly. Caleb followed her gaze to the bed, and his expression hardened. "You take the bed. I'll sleep out here." "That's not—" Lena stood on unsteady feet, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Rourke, I understand. I know how this works. I know what you'll expect for—" "Expect?" The word came out sharp as a whip crack. "What exactly do you think I expect?" I'm not stupid either. Lena pulled at the collar of her dress with her good hand, fingers finding the top button. You helped me. Took me in. I know the price of that. I know what men want when they… Stop. Caleb's voice was flat, cold as the storm outside. Stop talking and button that back up. Lena froze, her fingers still on the fabric. I don't understand. Don't you? Caleb turned away, his shoulders rigid. You think I pulled you out of that storm so I could… He cut himself off, jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. I don't know what happened to you in Cheyenne. I don't know what you've been through, what you've had to do to survive. But I'm not those men. I'm not whoever taught you that survival has to cost pieces of yourself. Everyone wants something, Lena whispered. Yeah, I want you to get some sleep before you collapse. I want you to heal up enough that you don't die the second you step back out that door, and I want you to understand that there's no payment required for basic human decency. He moved to the bed, yanked the blanket off, and tossed it toward the bench. You sleep there. I'll take the floor by the fire. And if you try to offer me anything else, I'll put you back out in the storm myself. Lena stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't how it worked. This wasn't how it had ever worked. Men took what they wanted, or they negotiated a price, but they always wanted something. Always. I don't… She faltered, lost. Why? Caleb met her eyes, and the anger in his expression shifted into something deeper, something that looked like old pain. Because 16 years ago, someone showed me the same kindness when I needed it. Didn't ask for anything in return, didn't expect anything. Just helped because it was the right thing to do. He settled down near the fireplace, using his saddle as a pillow. Now get some sleep, Lena Voss. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. She moved to the bed on autopilot, her mind spinning. The mattress was stuffed with straw and surprisingly comfortable. The blanket smelled like wood smoke and something else. Leather, maybe, and the clean scent of mountain air. Lena pulled the blankets up to her chin and stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet sounds of Caleb settling in by the fire. Her feet still throbbed, her hand pulsed with each heartbeat, and exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. But sleep wouldn't come. Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lena Voss didn't know what was expected of her, didn't know how to exist in a space where she wasn't currency, wasn't a thing to be used or traded, didn't know how to be human. The tears came then, silent and hot, soaking into the pillow. She cried for the girl she'd been before Cheyenne, before Darius Kane, before she'd learned that survival meant surrender. Cried for the woman she'd become, so broken that basic kindness felt like a trap. And she cried because somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd thought was long dead, a small spark of something dangerous flickered to life. Hope. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled its fury against the cabin walls. But inside, for the first time in years, Lena Voss was warm and safe. And she had no idea what to do with that. The storm raged through the night, but eventually, even Wyoming's fury had to rest. Lena woke to pale gray light filtering through the single window and the smell of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She sat up slowly, her body a catalog of pain. Her feet felt like clubs wrapped in fire. Her hand throbbed in steady rhythm with her heartbeat, and muscles she'd forgotten existed screamed protest at every movement. But she was alive. Caleb stood at the stove, his back to her, working on breakfast with the same efficient movements he'd applied to everything else. He'd changed clothes, different flannel shirt, same canvas pants, and his dark hair was damp, suggesting he'd already been outside to tend the horses. "Coffee's on the table," he said without turning around. "Help yourself." Lena managed to get her feet under her. They'd returned to more or less normal color, though they were swollen and tender, and hobbled to the table. The coffee was black as sin and tasted like it could strip paint, but it was hot and real, and she drank it gratefully. "Storm's passing," Caleb continued, sliding eggs and salt pork onto 2 plates. "Should clear by mid-morning. Roads will be bad for a day or two, but passable if you're careful." "Oh." Lena wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, suddenly reluctant. "Right. You said one night." "That's what I said." He set a plate in front of her, 3 eggs, generous portions of pork, more of that good bread toasted crisp. Eat. They ate in silence. Lena tried not to wolf down her food, tried to maintain some dignity, but she was so hungry that restraint became impossible. Caleb didn't comment, just refilled her plate when she finished, then pushed the breadbasket closer. When they'd both eaten their fill, Caleb cleared the plates and poured more coffee. He settled into the chair across from her, his eyes thoughtful. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Before you got lost." "North." Lena traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "Just north." "North to where?" "Does it matter?" "If you're walking, it matters plenty. Next settlement north of here is Sheridan, about 80 miles. You won't make that on foot, not in this weather, not in your condition." 80 miles. Lena felt her heart sink. "I'll manage." "You'll die." Caleb's voice was flat, factual. "You got no proper gear, no horse, no supplies. Hell, you barely made 200 yards last night before you collapsed. How far you think you're going to get in 80 miles of mountain country?" "I don't have a choice." "Everyone's got choices. Question is whether you can live with the consequences." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Why Sheridan?" "It's far from Cheyenne. So's plenty of other places. Canada's west of here, Montana's north. Why specifically north?" Lena met his eyes, seeing the intelligence behind the hard exterior. He was testing her, trying to determine if she was being straight with him or spinning some story. "Because Darius Kane's men won't expect it," she said quietly. "They'll think I went west to California or south to Denver. North is empty country, hard country. They won't think I'm stupid enough to try it alone." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Darius Kane, the crime boss out of Cheyenne. You know him?" "Know of him. Everyone in Wyoming knows of him. Railroad money, saloons, brothels, opium dens." Caleb's voice carried the weight of disdain. "He owns half the law and controls the other half through fear." "You worked for him?" It wasn't really a question, but Lena answered anyway. "I belong to him. There's a difference." "And now you don't." "Now I ran." Lena lifted her chin, defiant. "And he'll want me back, not because I matter, but because no one leaves Darius Kane without permission. It's bad for business." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the table. Outside, the wind had died to a low moan, and sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. "You won't make Sheridan," he said finally, "but there's a place about 20 miles east of here. Small trading post, family operation. They're good people. They could get you on a stage heading north, set you up with supplies." Hope flared in Lena's chest. "You'd show me the way?" "I'd take you there myself." Caleb stood, moving to the window. "But not today. You need at least one more day to rest. Let those feet heal enough for riding. And we need to wait for the roads to clear some." "Riding? I don't have a horse." "I've got two." "You can take the roan. She's steady, won't bolt if you treat her right." He glanced back at her. "Consider it a loan. When you get to the trading post, you can leave her there. I'll pick her up next time I'm out that way." Lena felt tears prickling at her eyes again and blinked them back fiercely. "Why are you helping me?" "Told you last night." "No." She stood, ignoring the protest from her feet. "Someone helped you once, fine. But this is more than that. You're putting yourself at risk, giving me a horse, taking time away from whatever you do up here. Why?" Caleb turned from the window, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was completely unguarded. What she saw there was old grief, old anger, and a bone-deep weariness that suggested he'd seen too much of the world's darkness. "Because I know what men like Darius Kane do to the people they own," he said quietly. "And because nobody should have to believe that survival requires surrendering their worth. You ran. That took courage. I won't be the reason you get dragged back." The simple honesty of it broke something loose in Lena's chest. She'd been braced for ulterior motives, for hidden expectations, for the inevitable moment when kindness would reveal itself as just another transaction. But there was nothing in Caleb's face except weathered integrity. "Thank you," she whispered. "Save your thanks until you're safely on that stage north." Caleb moved to the door, pulling on a heavy coat. "I need to check the horses. Clear snow from the barn. You rest that hand in those feet. There's more coffee if you want it." He stepped outside, letting in a blast of cold air before the door swung shut behind him. Lena returned to the bed, her mind reeling. Every instinct she'd developed over the past 3 years screamed that this was a trap, that no man was this decent without expecting payment, that she should be planning her next escape instead of trusting a stranger. But another part of her, the part that had survived despite everything, the part that had found the courage to break that window and run, that part whispered something different. Maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be helped. The thought was terrifying. Lena pulled the blanket around her shoulders and moved to the window, watching Caleb work in the barn. He moved with the easy confidence of a man completely at home in harsh country, carrying hay, checking hooves, performing the 100 small tasks that kept animals alive through Wyoming winters. She was still watching when riders appeared on the ridge. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, shadows cast by clouds maybe, or her exhausted mind conjuring threats from nothing. But then the shapes resolved into clear definition. 5 men on horseback, picking their way carefully down the slope toward the cabin. Lena's blood turned to ice. She knew those men. Knew the way they sat their horses, the shape of their hats, the casual arrogance in their posture. She'd seen them in Cheyenne, standing guard outside Darius's office, collecting payments from merchants who couldn't afford not to pay, enforcing the kind of order that kept empires of vice running smooth. Cain's men. Her first instinct was to run, out the back, into the woods, anywhere but here. But her feet wouldn't move. Terror had frozen her as solid as the storm had tried to. In the barn, Caleb had gone still. He'd seen them too. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The riders held their position on the ridge, clearly visible against the white landscape. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, one hand resting on something Lena couldn't see. Then the lead rider started down the slope. Lena's paralysis broke. She stumbled away from the window, her mind racing through impossible calculations. If she ran now, they'd see her. If she stayed, Caleb would, what, fight 5 armed men? Die defending a woman he'd known for less than 12 hours? No. No, I won't let that happen. She moved to the door, yanking it open. Cold air slammed into her, stealing her breath. Caleb! Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She tried again, louder. Caleb, there... He was already moving, crossing from the barn to the cabin in long, purposeful strides. When he reached her, he caught her arm and pulled her inside, shutting the door firmly behind them. I know, he said. I saw them. They're Cain's men. They're looking for me. Lena gripped his arm, desperate. You have to let me go. Tell them I was never here. Tell them... I'm not telling them anything. Caleb moved to the rifle, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. And you're not going anywhere. You don't understand. These men, they'll kill you if you get in their way. They'll... Lena. Caleb's voice cut through her panic like a blade. Listen to me. You're under my roof. That means something out here. It means I don't hand people over to anyone for any reason. You understand? But, do you understand? She nodded mutely, her heart hammering against her ribs. Good. Caleb moved to the window, positioning himself where he could see the approaching riders. Now get away from the door and stay quiet. Let me handle this. Lena backed toward the fireplace, her eyes locked on the window. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could make out individual faces. The lead rider was Marcus Cole, Cain's head enforcer, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for creative violence. The others she recognized less well, but they all wore the same expression, predatory confidence. They knew she was here. Somehow, they knew. The riders pulled up about 20 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle that blocked any easy escape route. Marcus sat his horse easily, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Hello, the cabin? His voice carried clearly through the thin walls. We're looking for someone. Woman, about 5'4", dark hair, probably injured. You seen anyone like that? Caleb didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm, controlled. I'm not in the habit of keeping track of strangers' whereabouts. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Marcus smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that didn't reach his eyes. Now, friend, there's no need for hostility. We're just collecting property that belongs to Mr. Cain. You help us out, we ride on peaceful. You don't? He shrugged. Well, that'd be unfortunate. Property. Caleb's voice dripped contempt. You mean a person? I mean a woman who stole from her employer and ran. That makes her a thief and a fugitive. We're well within our rights to retrieve her. Stole what? Herself, primarily. Also $300 in cash and some jewelry. Marcus leaned forward in his saddle. So you see, this isn't some small matter. Mr. Kane takes theft seriously. Lena felt her face flush hot. That's a lie, she said, stepping forward before she could stop herself. I never took... Caleb's hand shot out, catching her wrist and pulling her back. Stay behind me, he murmured, then raised his voice. Let's say I had seen someone matching that description. What makes you think I'd hand her over to men who track people through killing storms? The law, Marcus said simply. We have a warrant for her arrest, signed by Judge Hammond in Cheyenne. You're legally obligated to turn her over. Let me see it. Marcus nudged his horse forward, pulling a folded paper from his coat. Caleb moved to the door, opening it just wide enough to take the document. Lena held her breath as he scanned the paper, his expression unreadable. Finally, Caleb handed it back. That's an interesting piece of fiction. Judge Hammond's signature doesn't look anything like that. I've seen it enough times to know. Marcus's smile disappeared. You calling me a liar? I'm saying that paper's worthless, which means you've got no legal authority here. Caleb's hand shifted to the rifle at his side. And on my land, without legal authority, you're just trespassers. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The four riders behind Marcus shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to weapons. We can do this easy or hard, friend, Marcus said, his voice gone flat and dangerous. Your choice. I'm not your friend. Caleb raised the Winchester, not quite aiming, but making his intentions clear. And my choice is for you to turn those horses around and ride back the way you came. For several seconds, nobody moved. Lena could hear her own heartbeat, feel each breath like fire in her lungs. 5 against 1. The odds were impossible. Then Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You know who you're crossing? He asked. Darius Kane owns half of Wyoming. He's got judges, lawmen, politicians in his pocket. You really think you can protect one runaway whore against that kind of power? Don't know until I try, Caleb said evenly. Your funeral. Marcus gathered his reins. We'll be back, with more men, more guns, and when we come, we won't be asking polite. I'll be here. Marcus wheeled his horse around, gesturing to his men. They followed, but Lena noticed they kept their hands on their weapons, kept looking back over their shoulders as they climbed back up the ridge. When they finally disappeared over the top, Caleb lowered the rifle and closed the door. He turned to face Lena, and she saw something new in his expression. Not anger exactly, but a grim determination. They'll be back, he said quietly. Tonight, probably. Maybe with 10 men instead of 5. I know. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I should have kept running. I should never have. Should have froze to death? Caleb shook his head. This isn't your fault, Lena. None of it. Not Kane, not his men, not what they made you do in Cheyenne. But I brought them here, to your door. They brought themselves. He moved to the window, scanning the ridge where the riders had disappeared. Question now is what we do about it. We? Lena stared at him. Mr. Rourke, Caleb, you've done more than enough, more than anyone could expect. But this isn't your fight. If you give me supplies and point me toward that trading post, you can die before you make it 5 miles. Caleb turned to face her fully. They'll be watching every trail, every road. You try to run now, alone, they'll pick you up before sunset. Then what do you suggest? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, clearly running through options and possibilities. When he spoke again, his voice carried absolute certainty. We make a stand, he said. Tonight, when they come back, we fight. And we make sure they understand that taking you is going to cost them more than they're willing to pay. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's better than rolling over. Caleb moved to the gun rack on the wall, selecting weapons with calm precision. Besides, I've got advantages they don't know about. This is my ground. I know every approach, every angle, and I've held this cabin against worse odds than 5 to 1. When? Long time ago. Different fight, same principle. He checked the action on a shotgun, nodded satisfaction. Can you shoot? Lena thought about the Derringer she'd kept hidden in Cheyenne, the one she'd never had the courage to use. Not well. Doesn't need to be pretty, just needs to hit something. He handed her a revolver, a Colt .38, clean and well-maintained. 6 shots, point squeeze, don't jerk the trigger. Think you can manage that? The weight of the gun in her hand was terrifying and empowering in equal measure. I can try. That's all anyone can do. Caleb returned to his preparations, moving around the cabin with methodical efficiency. We've got maybe 4 or 5 hours before dark. That's when they'll come. Low light, harder to shoot straight. We need to be ready. For the next several hours, Lena watched Caleb transform the cabin into a fortress. He barricaded the door with heavy furniture, arranged firing positions at each window, loaded every gun in his small arsenal, and positioned them within easy reach. He showed Lena how to reload, how to clear a jam, how to switch weapons without losing sight of a target. All the while, he explained his reasoning with the patience of a born teacher. They'll come from multiple directions, probably 3 angles, maybe 4 if they're smart. We can't cover everything, so we focus on the main approaches. Door and front window are most likely. I'll take those. You watch the back. What if they try to burn us out? Roof sawed over log won't catch easy. Besides, fire would give away their positions. Caleb positioned a box of ammunition by Lena's window. They want you alive, remember? That limits their options. They want me alive so Kane can make an example of me, Lena said bitterly. Death would be kinder. Caleb stopped what he was doing and fixed her with those flint-gray eyes. Then we make sure it doesn't come to that. The afternoon crawled past. Lena tried to eat the food Caleb prepared. They'd need their strength, but her stomach was knotted too tight to accept much. She cleaned and checked the Colt so many times that Caleb finally took it from her, set it aside, and handed her a cup of coffee instead. Relax, he said, though his own tension was visible in the set of his shoulders. Panic gets you killed faster than bullets. How are you so calm? Practice. Caleb settled near the front window, his rifle across his knees. And knowing that panic won't change what's coming, either we hold them off or we don't. Worrying about it just clouds your thinking when it matters most. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold, Caleb made one final check of their defenses. Then he moved to sit beside Lena, his back against the wall. Listen, he said quietly. When this starts, it's going to be loud and confusing. Don't freeze up. Don't try to think about what you're doing. Just react. You see movement. You shoot. You hear me yell an order. You follow it. Understand? Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Caleb pulled a leather cord from around his neck. A small silver cross dangled from it, worn smooth with age. He pressed it into her good hand. My mother's. She'd want you to have it. I can't. You can. If something happens to me, you take the roan and ride west, not north. There's a valley about 10 miles that direction, small ranch run by a couple named Henderson. Tell them Caleb Rourke sent you. They'll help. Caleb, promise me, Lena. She closed her fingers around the cross, feeling the warmth of it against her palm. I promise. All right then. Caleb stood, moving back to his position by the window. Now we wait. The sun touched the mountain peaks, flooding the cabin with red-gold light that made everything look like it was burning. In that strange, beautiful illumination, Lena studied the man who'd chosen to stand between her and death. She barely knew him, didn't know his history, his past, what had brought him to this lonely mountain cabin, didn't know what ghosts he carried, what old wounds shaped his decisions. But she knew enough. She knew he was the first person in years to look at her and see a human being instead of property. Knew he'd given her back something she'd thought was lost forever, the belief that she deserved to be treated with dignity. And she knew that whatever happened in the next few hours, she would fight to protect him as fiercely as he was fighting to protect her. The sun dropped below the peaks. Shadows rushed across the snow like spilled ink. And in the gathering darkness, Lena Voss waited for the men who'd come to drag her back to hell. But this time, she wouldn't go quietly. This time, she'd fight. Darkness came fast to the Wyoming mountains, and with it, a silence that felt like held breath. The kind of quiet that preceded violence, thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of settling timber in the cabin walls and the whisper of wind through the pines. Lena crouched by the back window, the Colt heavy in her bandaged hand, every muscle coiled tight. The waiting was worse than anything she'd imagined. Worse than the storm, worse than the cold. At least those enemies had been straightforward, honest in their intention to kill her. This waiting held the promise of something far more terrible. "Stay focused," Caleb murmured from his position near the front. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes, hadn't even seemed to breathe, his eyes tracking the darkness beyond the window with the patience of a predator. "They'll try to make you nervous first. Psychological warfare. Don't let them." "How do you know what they'll do?" "Because it's what I'd do." His voice was matter-of-fact, carrying no pride or shame, just simple acknowledgement of shared tactics. You test your enemy's nerves before you test their defenses. See if you can break them without firing a shot. As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the darkness, distant at first, then growing clearer. Singing. A man's voice, rough and mocking, carrying some bawdy saloon tune that Lena recognized from her time in Cheyenne. "Sweet Lena, won't you come out and play? Kane's boys have traveled such a long, long way." The voice twisted the familiar melody into something obscene, each word dripping with implied violence. Lena felt her stomach clench, felt the Colt beginning to shake in her grip. "Steady," Caleb's voice cut through her rising panic. "That's Marcus. He's out there in the dark, trying to rattle you. Don't give him the satisfaction. We'll take you home where you belong, back to Kane's bed, where you've been all along." "Lying bastard," Lena whispered, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. "I was never in Kane's bed. I was kept for the high-paying customers, not—" "Doesn't matter what's true," Caleb interrupted quietly. "Only matters what he can make you feel. Fear, shame, anger, any of those will cloud your judgment. That's what he wants." The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by Marcus's normal speaking voice, somehow more menacing for its conversational tone. "You know this doesn't have to go bad, Rourke. Just send the girl out. You keep your life, your cabin, everything. Walk away clean. Why die for a woman who's not even yours?" Caleb didn't respond. The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. "Or maybe you've already sampled the merchandise?" Marcus's laugh was ugly, knowing. "Can't say I blame you. That pretty face, those eyes. Kane charged top dollar for a night with her. You get her for free. That's quite a bargain." Lena felt heat flood her face, shame and rage warring in her chest. She opened her mouth to shout back, to deny it, to— Caleb's hand found her shoulder in the darkness, firm and grounding. "Don't," he breathed. "That's what he wants. Any response tells him where we are, tells him he's getting to you. Stay silent. Stay focused." She bit down on her tongue hard enough to taste copper and nodded. More silence. Lena counted her heartbeats, tried to control her breathing the way Caleb had taught her. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. But her heart was racing too fast, her lungs demanding more air than the measured breathing allowed. Then she saw it, movement at the edge of the tree line, just a shadow shifting among shadows, but definitely human. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "I see him," Caleb murmured. "Northeast corner, about 40 yards. Don't shoot yet. Let them commit first." "What if he gets closer?" "Then I'll put him down before he reaches the cabin. Trust me." Another figure appeared on the opposite side, barely visible in the starlight. Then another behind the barn. They were surrounding the cabin exactly as Caleb had predicted. "4 positions," Caleb said, his voice utterly calm despite the death closing in around them. "That means they left 1 man with the horses, probably. Marcus is still out there running his mouth. The other 3 are positioning for the assault." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've done this dance before." There was something dark in his voice, some old memory surfacing. Different war, same steps. Lena wanted to ask what he meant, but movement drew her attention back to her window. The shadow was closer now, close enough that she could make out the shape of a rifle, the outline of a hat. "Caleb," she whispered urgently, "I see him. Hold your fire until I give the word." Her palms were slick with sweat despite the cold. The Colt felt impossibly heavy, impossibly foreign in her hand. What made her think she could actually shoot someone? She'd never hurt anyone in her life, never even considered. The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across her face, her arms. She screamed, stumbling backward, and the Colt went off once, twice, the reports deafening in the enclosed space. Return fire punched through the wall beside her head, splinters erupting from the logs. "Down!" Caleb roared, and Lena dropped to the floor as his Winchester opened up, the muzzle flash illuminating the cabin in strobe bursts. The distinctive crack of the rifle was followed by a cry of pain from outside. Someone hit, hurt, but not dead. "Stay down!" Caleb was moving now, fluid and deadly, shifting from window to window as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. His rifle barked again, answered by the deeper boom of a shotgun from outside. Lena crawled across the floor, glass crunching under her knees, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might tear itself from her chest. Another window shattered. The door shuddered under repeated impacts, someone trying to shoot through the lock. "The door!" she shouted. "I know!" Caleb dropped the empty Winchester and snatched up the shotgun he'd prepared, firing both barrels through the door in a thunderous blast that brought a scream from the other side. "Reload the rifle! 3 shells, right pocket of my coat!" Lena scrambled to the coat hanging by the fireplace, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the buttons. She found the shells, dropped one, retrieved it with a sob of frustration. The Winchester was foreign in her hands, the loading mechanism a puzzle she'd watched Caleb demonstrate but never tried herself. "Slide the carrier, push the shells in, come on!" Caleb's voice was urgent but controlled, talking her through it even as he fired the revolver at shadows moving past the front window. She got 2 shells loaded before her nerve broke. "I can't, I don't—" "Yes, you can!" Caleb was suddenly beside her, his hand covering hers, guiding her movements. "See? Slide, push, you've got this." The 3rd shell clicked into place. Caleb took the rifle, checked it with a quick, practiced motion, and was back at the window before Lena could catch her breath. The firing intensified. Lead punched through the cabin walls like angry hornets, thudding into furniture, shattering plates, sending up puffs of splinters and dust. Caleb fired, shifted position, fired again, each shot deliberate, controlled, nothing wasted. "How many?" Lena shouted over the cacophony. "At least 3 still active. One's hit but not down." Caleb ducked as return fire splintered the window frame beside his head. "They're getting bolder. Won't be long before they rush us." As if on cue, Marcus's voice rang out again. "Last chance, Rourke. Send her out or we burn you both." "Thought you said the roof wouldn't catch." Lena's voice pitched high with fear. "It won't, but they don't know that." Caleb ejected spent shells, reloaded with smooth efficiency. "They're bluffing, trying to—" The crash of breaking glass came from the back room, the small storage area Lena hadn't even noticed earlier. Someone was coming through the window back there. Caleb's eyes met hers, and in that instant she saw the calculation running behind them. He couldn't be in 2 places at once. If he went to deal with the intruder in the back, the men at the front would rush the door. If he stayed here, whoever was in the back room would have free rein. "Go," Lena said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I'll hold the front." "Lena, go!" She grabbed the revolver from where he'd set it, checked the cylinder the way he'd shown her. 3 rounds left. "I can do this." For a heartbeat, Caleb hesitated. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive, and disappeared into the back room. Lena was alone. The silence was immediate and terrifying. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and too fast. Could hear the creak of footsteps on the porch outside. Could hear Marcus's voice, closer now, just beyond the door. "That's right, Rourke. Leave the whore to hold the line. She's real good at being on her back. But I wonder how she'll do with a gun in her hand." The rage that flooded through Lena was white-hot and clarifying. Every humiliation she'd endured in Cheyenne, every degradation, every moment she'd been treated as less than human, it all crystallized into pure, focused fury. She moved to the window, raised the revolver with both hands despite the scream of protest from her injured palm, and sighted down the barrel at the shadow of Marcus's hat. "I'm better than you think," she said, and pulled the trigger. The revolver bucked in her hands. The shadow jerked sideways, hit or startled, she couldn't tell, and dove for cover. Return fire came instantly, but Lena was already moving, scrambling to the next position the way Caleb had taught her. From the back room came the sound of a struggle, Bodies colliding, furniture breaking, the meaty impact of fist on flesh. A gunshot, muffled by walls. Then silence. "Caleb!" Lena screamed. "I'm fine. Stay focused." The door shuddered under a heavy impact. They were trying to break it down, using one of the support posts from the porch as a battering ram. The barricaded furniture held, but the hinges were starting to tear free from the frame. Lena fired through the door, aiming low where she hoped legs might be. Someone cursed, and the battering stopped. "You bitch!" Marcus's voice was thick with pain. "You'll pay for that. Kane wanted you back intact, but I think he'll settle for pieces." The window to Lena's left exploded inward. She spun, firing wildly, and saw a figure pulling itself through, big man, heavy coat, face she didn't recognize. Her shot went wide, punching through the wall behind him. He grinned, teeth white in the darkness, and raised his pistol. Lena pulled the trigger again. Click. Empty. Time seemed to slow. She saw the man's finger tightening on his trigger, saw the barrel of his gun aligning with her chest, saw her own death written in the cold certainty of his eyes. Then Caleb's rifle barked from the doorway to the back room, and the man's head snapped sideways in a spray of dark matter. He dropped without a sound, half in and half out of the window. "Reload!" Caleb shouted, working the lever action. "Kitchen table box of 38 says, move!" Lena moved. Her hands were steadier now, driven by pure adrenaline and the crystal-clear understanding that hesitation meant death. She dumped the spent shells, loaded fresh rounds, her fingers working with desperate speed. Caleb fired again and again, laying down suppressing fire that drove the attackers back from the windows. But Lena could hear more movement outside. They were regrouping, preparing for another assault. "How many left?" she asked, snapping the cylinder closed. "3 for sure, maybe 4. Caleb's face was grim, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "They'll rush us next, all at once, every direction. That's the only play they have left." "Can we hold?" He met her eyes, and the honesty in his expression was more frightening than any lie could have been. "I don't know." From outside, Marcus's voice, "All together, now!" The attack came like a storm surge. The door shattered under renewed battering. The front window gave way to a hail of gunfire. Shadows swarmed at every opening, and the cabin filled with thunder and smoke and the acrid stink of gunpowder. Lena fired at the shapes coming through the door, once, twice, 3 times. One fell, clutching his leg. Another stumbled back. The third kept coming, a massive brute of a man with a face like carved granite and eyes that promised terrible things. She pulled the trigger again. Click. Empty again. The man lunged across the cabin, faster than his size suggested possible. His hand closed around Lena's throat, lifting her off her feet, slamming her back against the wall hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. "Darius sends his regards," he growled, his breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey. His other hand reached for the knife at his belt. "Says to make sure you remember what happens to girls who run." Black spots danced across Lena's vision. She clawed at his hand, useless, her strength nothing compared to his. She tried to scream for Caleb, but no sound would come. This was it. This was how it ended, not frozen in the storm, but strangled in a warm cabin by a monster wearing human skin. Then she felt it, the hard shape of the bone-handle knife in her coat pocket. The one she'd carried from Cheyenne but never had the courage to use. Her hand found the grip, drew it free. And with every ounce of strength left in her body, she drove the blade up under the man's ribs. His eyes went wide. The pressure on her throat vanished as he staggered back, looking down at the knife buried to the hilt in his chest. He opened his mouth to speak, managed only a wet, bubbling sound, and collapsed. Lena fell to her knees, gasping, her vision swimming. Across the cabin, Caleb was locked in brutal close-quarters combat with another attacker, the 2 men grappling for control of a rifle between them. She wanted to help, wanted to stand, to fight, to do something. But her body wouldn't respond, her limbs heavy as lead, her lungs screaming for air. The struggle ended with a gunshot. Caleb stood over the body of his opponent, blood streaming from a gash across his shoulder, but alive. For several seconds, the cabin was silent, except for their ragged breathing. "Lena?" Caleb's voice was hoarse. "You hit?" "No." She forced herself to look away from the dead man at her feet, from the knife still embedded in his chest. "No, I'm okay. Can you stand?" She tried, failed, tried again, This time her legs held, barely. Caleb moved to the door, peering out into the darkness. I count 2 down out there, plus 3 in here. That's 5. Marcus, and 1 more still out there somewhere. Is it over? Not even close. Caleb retrieved his rifle, reloading with mechanical precision despite his wounded shoulder. They'll pull back, reassess, but they won't quit. Not until we're dead or they've taken you. We can't hold against another assault like that. No. Caleb's jaw was set, his eyes hard. We can't. Which means we don't wait for them to come to us again. We take the fight to them. Lena stared at him. That's insane. Maybe, but sitting here waiting to die is worse. He moved to the weapons rack, selecting a second revolver and a knife. They'll expect us to hunker down, lick our wounds, won't expect us to come out aggressive. You're serious. As death. Caleb checked the revolver, spun the cylinder, and tucked it into his belt. I'm going out there. You stay here, guard the door. Anyone but me tries to come through. You shoot first and ask questions never. Understand? No. Lena grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. You can't go out there alone. They'll kill you. They'll try. Something in Caleb's expression shifted, the civilized man falling away to reveal something older, something forged in violence and tempered by survival. But I've been hunted by better men than these, and I'm still here. Caleb, please. This isn't a debate, Lena. His voice was gentle but inflexible. Those men out there won't stop. Even if we hold them off till dawn, they'll just bring more. More men. More guns. Eventually they'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers. He touched her face, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. But if I can end it tonight, if I can take out Marcus and whoever's left, they'll break. Men like that only fight when they think they'll win. You make it cost them too much, they'll run. And if you're wrong, then you take the roan and ride for Henderson's ranch. Like I told you, don't look back, don't try to help me. Just survive. He pressed something into her good hand, the silver cross on its leather cord. My mother would want you to have this, would want you to live. Tears blurred Lena's vision. I don't even know you. Why are you doing this? Because you deserve better than Cain. Better than men who think they can own another person. Caleb moved to the door, his hand on the latch. Because 16 years ago, I was you, running, desperate, certain I was going to die. And someone I didn't know chose to help me anyway. Changed my whole life with that choice. Who? Doesn't matter, they're gone now. Pain flickered across his face, old and deep. But their kindness lived on in me. And tonight, it lives on in what I do for you. He opened the door. Wait! Lena grabbed his arm one more time. At least tell me what happened 16 years ago. Tell me who you were running from. Caleb paused, silhouetted against the darkness. For a long moment he was silent. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. I was a soldier, Union Army, toward the end of the war. My unit did terrible things. Things I can't take back, can't make right. When it was over, I ran. Tried to drink myself to death in Denver. Figured that was what I deserved. He didn't look at her. Woman named Sarah Chen found me in an alley, half frozen, more than half dead. Took me in, nursed me back to health, never asked for my story. Just helped because it was right. What happened to her? Cholera 3 years later. I was with her at the end. Tried to repay her kindness, but she wouldn't hear of it. His voice roughened. Said the only way to repay a gift was to give it forward. Help someone else who needed it, the way she'd helped me. So you came up here, to the mountains. Came here to disappear. Figured I'd live out my days alone, away from people I might hurt. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes bright in the darkness. But then a woman stumbled out of a storm and gave me a chance to honor Sarah's memory, to be the kind of man she believed I could become. Before Lena could respond, he stepped out into the night and closed the door behind him. She stood frozen, listening to his footsteps crunch across the snow, heard them fade into silence. And then she was alone in a cabin full of bodies and blood and the lingering smoke of gunfire. Reload. That was the first priority. Lena forced her shaking hands to work, loading fresh rounds into the Colt, checking the Winchester, arranging the weapons within easy reach. Every sound from outside made her flinch. Every shadow at the window looked like death coming to collect. Minutes crawled past, or maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning in the suspended terror of waiting. Then, gunfire. 2 shots, close together. A shout, cut short. More shots. The distinctive crack of Caleb's Winchester. Return fire from multiple positions. Lena moved to the window, desperate to see, but the darkness revealed nothing except muzzle flashes in the trees. She counted the shots. Caleb's measured and deliberate, his enemies frantic and wild, and tried to construct a narrative from the sounds. A scream, definitely male. Someone was hit. More shots. Then silence so complete it felt like the world holding its breath. "Caleb?" Lena whispered, knowing he couldn't hear but unable to stop herself. "Caleb, please." A single gunshot broke the silence. Then another. Then nothing. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run out there, wanted to find him, wanted... The door exploded inward. Marcus Cole stumbled through, his face a mask of blood, his right arm hanging useless at his side. He still held a pistol in his left hand, the barrel wavering as he tried to aim. "You!" he gasped, his eyes finding Lena. "You did this, all of it. My men are dead because of you, you worthless..." Lena raised the Colt and fired. The shot took Marcus in the chest, punching him backward against the doorframe. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain, then back up at Lena, his expression one of pure disbelief. "You shot me," he said stupidly. "You actually..." She fired again, and again, and again, until the hammer clicked on an empty chamber and Marcus Cole was nothing but a crumpled pile of expensive clothes and wasted violence on her threshold. The Colt slipped from Lena's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. She stood there, staring at what she'd done, her mind trying to process the reality of it. She'd killed a man. Not in the heat of struggle like the brute who'd tried to strangle her, but coldly, deliberately, with full understanding of what she was doing. And she felt nothing, no horror, no regret, just a vast, echoing emptiness where emotion should have been. Movement at the door made her look up. Caleb stood there, swaying, his face pale beneath the blood and dirt. His left hand pressed against his side, crimson seeping between his fingers. His rifle was gone, lost somewhere in the darkness. "Is it..." Lena's voice cracked. "Are they all..." "Dead or run?" Caleb took a step inside and his legs buckled. Lena caught him, or tried to. He was too heavy, and they both went down in a controlled collapse. "Got Marcus's partner in the trees. Think one more got away, but he won't be back." "You're hit." "Yeah." Caleb's laugh was wet, pained. "Knife. Got sloppy. Too old for this kind of fighting." Lena tore at his shirt, exposing the wound. It was bad, a deep stab wound below his ribs, bleeding steadily. The kind of injury that could kill in hours if not treated. "Tell me what to do," she said, fighting down panic. "Caleb, tell me how to fix this." Medical kit. Cupboard. His breathing was shallow, labored. "Needle, thread, you're going to have to stitch it." "I can't..." "Yes, you can." His hand found hers, squeezed with surprising strength. "Same as I stitched your hand. Clean it, close it up, wrap it tight. You've got this." Lena moved on autopilot, retrieving the medical kit, laying out supplies with shaking hands. The alcohol that had burned so terribly on her own wound was nothing compared to what it would do to this injury, but there was no choice. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Everything hurts." Caleb's eyes were half closed, his face gone gray. "Just do it quick." She poured the alcohol. Caleb's back arched, a strangled sound escaping through his clenched teeth, but he didn't pull away. Lena worked as fast as her trembling hands allowed, cleaning the wound, threading the needle the way she'd watched him do. The first stitch was agony to witness, the second was worse. By the third, Caleb had passed out, which was probably a mercy. Lena stitched in the firelight, her vision blurred by tears, her hands somehow steady despite everything. 12 stitches to close the wound, each one as neat as she could manage. Then bandages wrapped tight around his midsection, holding everything together. When it was done, she sat back, exhausted, and looked at the carnage surrounding her. 5 bodies in and around the cabin. 5 men who'd woken up this morning with no idea they'd be dead before midnight. She should feel something about that. Horror, guilt, something. But there was only that same vast emptiness. Caleb stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Did you? It's done. Lena helped him drink water, just a sip. You need rest, real rest, not just a few hours. Can't. If that man who ran goes back to Cain, he'll send more. Caleb tried to sit up and failed, falling back with a grunt of pain. Need to move. Get you somewhere safe. You're not moving anywhere except to that bed. Lena's voice was firm, surprising herself. And I'm not leaving you. Lena, no. She met his eyes, her jaw set. You've spent this whole time protecting me, making decisions for my safety. Now it's my turn. We're staying here until you're strong enough to travel. And if more of Cain's men come, she picked up the reloaded Colt, checked it with movements that were becoming familiar. Then I'll deal with them. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled, a small, pained expression that transformed his hard features into something almost gentle. Yes, ma'am, he murmured. With effort, Lena managed to get him onto the bed. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow, his breathing shallow but steady. She covered him with blankets, built up the fire, then settled into a chair positioned where she could watch both the door and the windows. The night stretched on. Lena sat in the firelight, the Colt across her lap, listening to Caleb breathe and watching for threats that didn't come. As dawn began to gray the eastern sky, she finally allowed herself to think about what had happened. 5 men dead by violence, 1 man wounded, possibly dying, because he'd chosen to help her. And Lena herself transformed from victim to survivor, from property to person with agency. She looked down at the Colt in her hands, at the blood on her dress, at the bodies she'd have to deal with once Caleb was stronger. 3 days ago, she'd been Darius Cain's property, convinced she had no value beyond what men would pay for her body. Tonight, she'd killed 2 men and saved the life of a third. The woman who'd stumbled out of that storm was gone. Someone else sat in this chair now, someone harder, someone who understood that survival sometimes meant becoming the monster you'd always feared. But as she looked at Caleb sleeping peacefully despite his wounds, despite the violence he'd endured on her behalf, Lena understood something else too. Sometimes survival also meant finding people worth fighting for, worth becoming a monster to protect. The sun rose on a cabin surrounded by death, but inside 2 people still breathed, still survived, still had a chance at something better than what they'd left behind. It would have to be enough. The bodies had to be dealt with before the sun climbed much higher. Lena stood in the doorway as first light painted the snow in shades of pink and gold, looking at the carnage scattered across Caleb's property with a detachment that would have terrified her 3 days ago. Now it just felt like another task that needed completing, like washing dishes or mending clothes. Marcus Cole lay where he'd fallen, his expensive coat stiff with frozen blood. The man she'd stabbed was curled on his side near the fireplace, his face frozen in an expression of surprise. 3 more outside, 1 by the barn, 2 in the trees where Caleb had hunted them down. 5 bodies. 5 men who'd never go home. She should feel something about that. But the well of emotion inside her had gone dry somewhere during the long night, leaving only practical considerations. The bodies would draw wolves, possibly worse things. They needed to be moved, buried, or burned before they became a bigger problem. Caleb stirred on the bed, a low groan escaping him. Lena was at his side instantly, pressing her hand to his forehead. Hot, but not dangerously so. The fever was holding steady rather than climbing, which was the best she could hope for. Water, he rasped. She helped him drink, supporting his head with her good hand. He managed 3 swallows before falling back, exhausted by even that small effort. How long? He asked, his eyes struggling to focus. About 6 hours. It's dawn. The men who ran haven't come back. Lena glanced toward the window. I've been watching, nothing but wind and snow. Caleb tried to sit up and made it about 3 inches before his face went gray, and he collapsed back. Need to... The bodies. I'll handle it. You can't move them alone. They're too heavy, and your hand... I'll drag them if I have to. Lena's voice was flat, brooking no argument. You need to rest. Your stitches will tear if you move too much, and I'm not good enough at this to fix you a second time. For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then he nodded, the gesture small and defeated. There's a sledge in the barn, easier than dragging. And Lena? His eyes found hers. Don't bury them. Too much work, ground's frozen solid. There's a ravine about half a mile north. Take them there. Just leave them. Wolves will handle the rest. Harsh, maybe, but practical. His breathing was labored, each word clearly costing him. These men came here to kill or capture. They don't deserve better than they were willing to give. Lena nodded slowly. The old her, the one who'd stumbled out of the storm, would have been horrified by the cold pragmatism. But that woman was gone, buried under layers of necessity and survival. She dressed in the warmest clothes she could find in Caleb's trunk, pulling on wool pants that had to be rolled up at the ankles and a heavy coat that hung past her knees. The work ahead would be brutal, and she'd need every advantage the weather allowed. The sledge was where Caleb said it would be, leaning against the barn wall beside tools she couldn't name and didn't need. It was simple. A flat wooden platform on runners designed for hauling firewood or supplies. Today, it would serve a grimmer purpose. The first body was Marcus Cole. Lena gripped him under the arms, her injured hand screaming protest, and dragged him out of the cabin. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight that refused to cooperate. It took 3 attempts to get him onto the sledge, and by the time she succeeded, she was gasping for breath and her vision was swimming. The journey to the ravine was nightmare slow. The sledge caught on every rock, every root hidden under the snow. Lena pulled with both hands wrapped around the rope, ignoring the way her stitches threatened to tear, ignoring the blood seeping through her bandage. The ravine was exactly where Caleb had indicated, a deep crack in the earth that dropped 40 feet into darkness. Lena dragged Marcus to the edge, rolled him off the sledge, and watched his body tumble down into the shadows. It hit the bottom with a sound she'd hear in her nightmares for years to come. 4 more times she made that journey, 4 more bodies loaded, dragged, and consigned to the ravine's depths. By the 3rd trip, her muscles had moved past pain into a dangerous numbness. By the 4th, she was crying, not from grief or horror, but from sheer physical exhaustion. The sun was high overhead when she finally dragged herself back to the cabin, left the sledge outside, and stumbled through the door. Caleb was awake, watching her with eyes that held understanding and something that might have been respect. "It's done," she said, her voice hoarse. "Come here." Lena crossed to the bed. Caleb reached up with his good hand and gently unwrapped the bandage on her palm. The stitches had held, but the wound was angry and inflamed, blood seeping from one corner where she'd stressed it too hard. "You shouldn't have done all that alone," he said quietly. "Had to be done. You couldn't do it." Lena watched him clean and rebandage her hand with movements made clumsy by his own weakness. Someone had to step up. That someone didn't have to be you. Yes, it did. She met his eyes. "You've carried everything up to now. It's my turn to carry some of the weight." Caleb finished with her hand and lay back, clearly exhausted by even that small effort. "We need to leave. Soon as I can ride, we need to get you away from here." "You can't ride. You can barely sit up." "I'll manage." "Like hell you will." Lena stood, moving to the kitchen to prepare food they both desperately needed. "We're staying put for at least 3 days. Give you time to heal enough that you won't tear yourself open the second you climb on a horse." 3 days is too long. If Cain sends more men, then I'll handle them the same way I handled the last ones. The words came out harder than she intended, edged with a violence that surprised them both. "I'm not the helpless girl who knocked on your door, Caleb. I'm not something that needs constant protecting anymore." "I know." His voice was soft. "I saw what you did last night. Saw how you fought. And I'm trying to figure out if I should be proud or terrified." Lena turned to look at him, her hand stilling on the coffee pot. "What do you mean?" "I mean you killed 2 men without hesitation, stitched up a gut wound like you'd done it before, dragged 5 bodies to a ravine by yourself despite being half dead from exhaustion." Caleb's eyes were thoughtful, measuring. "That's not normal, Lena. That's someone who's crossed a line most people never even see. You've crossed that line." "Yeah, and I've spent 16 years trying to live with what's on the other side." He shifted, wincing at the pain. "I don't want that for you. Don't want you to become what I am." "What are you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling, clearly weighing how much truth to share. "During the war," he said finally, "my unit specialized in difficult assignments. We went places regular army couldn't go, did things regular army couldn't do. Sabotage, mostly. Sometimes intelligence gathering." His voice went distant. "Sometimes worse." "How much worse?" "Bad enough that I still see the faces of the people we killed. Bad enough that I drink myself to sleep most nights just to avoid the dreams." He looked at her then, his expression raw. "Bad enough that when the war ended, I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. That man was dead. I was just the ghost wearing his skin." Lena finished with the coffee, poured 2 cups, and brought them to the bedside. She settled into the chair, cradling the warmth between her palms. "What was his name?" she asked. "The man you were before?" "James. James Rourke." A bitter smile crossed Caleb's face. He was going to be a teacher, had plans to open a school in Ohio, marry a girl named Elizabeth, have kids and a garden and a normal life. What happened to him? Bull Run happened, then Antietam, then Fredericksburg. Each name was a stone dropping into dark water. By Gettysburg, James Rourke was gone. Only Caleb was left. The name my unit used in the field, the identity I put on like armor. And after the war, Caleb was all that remained. Lena thought about the woman who'd worked in Darius Kane's brothel, the one who'd learned to smile while dying inside, who'd traded pieces of her soul for survival and convinced herself it was the same as living. "I understand," she said quietly. "The person I was before Cheyenne, she's gone too. I don't even remember her name sometimes, don't remember what she wanted or who she dreamed of becoming. What do you remember? A farm in Missouri, my father's hands, rough from work but gentle. My mother singing while she did the washing." Lena's voice was distant, pulling up memories she'd buried deep. A boy named Thomas who promised to wait for me while I went to visit my aunt in Denver, said we'd get married when I came back. What happened? Cholera took my parents that winter. The farm went to creditors. Thomas married someone else. She laughed, the sound hollow. I was 17, alone in Denver with no money and no prospects. A woman named Margaret found me crying in an alley, offered me a job in her establishment, said it was respectable work, just serving drinks and entertaining gentlemen with conversation. But it wasn't. Not even close. Lena stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise. By the time I understood what I'd actually signed up for, Margaret had sold my contract to Darius Kane. He paid well, that was the trap. Paid well enough that I convinced myself it wasn't so bad, that I could earn my freedom if I just endured long enough. How long did you endure? 3 years. 3 years of being property. 3 years of becoming someone I didn't recognize. Her hands tightened on the cup. Then one night, Kane brought in a new girl. Couldn't have been more than 15, and I saw myself in her eyes, that same trapped desperation, that same dying hope. And I realized I couldn't save her, couldn't save any of them, could barely save myself. So you ran. So I broke a window and ran, because staying meant accepting that this was all I'd ever be. Lena met his eyes. And I'd rather die in a Wyoming storm than live as Darius Kane's property for one more day. Caleb reached out, his scarred hand covering hers. The gesture was simple, uncomplicated by expectation or demand. Just one broken person acknowledging another's pain. We're quite a pair, he said softly. 2 ghosts wearing dead people's skins, hiding in a cabin at the end of the world. Is that all we are? Just ghosts? I don't know. Caleb withdrew his hand, exhaustion pulling at his features. But I know I'm tired of haunting empty spaces alone. And I know that helping you, it's the first time in years I've felt like maybe I could be something more than the sum of my worst actions. Lena wanted to respond, wanted to tell him that he'd already proven himself to be more, that his choice to help her, to fight for her, to risk everything for a stranger spoke to a core of decency that no amount of past violence could erase. But before she could find the words, Caleb's eyes drifted closed. Within seconds, his breathing had deepened into sleep. She sat watching him, this hard, damaged man who'd chosen kindness, when cruelty would have been easier, studying the lines of pain etched into his face, the gray threading through his dark hair, the scars that marked his hands and arms. Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up, moaning around the cabin walls. Snow began to fall. Not the violent storm that had brought Lena here, but steady, persistent, the kind that would blanket the world in silence. 3 days, she'd told Caleb. 3 days before he'd be strong enough to travel. 3 days to figure out what came next. But as Lena rose to tend the fire and prepare the simple meal they'd need, she wondered if 3 days would be enough. Enough to heal, enough to plan, enough to prepare for whatever waited beyond these walls. And lurking beneath those practical concerns was a more dangerous question. What if she didn't want to leave? The thought was absurd. This cabin was Caleb's sanctuary, his retreat from a world that had broken him. She had no claim to it, no right to insert herself into his carefully constructed solitude. When he was healed, she'd take the roan mare and ride for that trading post he'd mentioned, catch a stage north, and disappear into whatever life waited beyond the reach of Darius Kane's influence. That was the plan. The only sensible plan. So why did the thought of leaving feel like another kind of death? Lena pushed the question aside and focused on immediate necessities. Food first. She found salt pork and beans, the kind of simple fare that would rebuild strength. While it cooked, she cleaned the cabin as best she could, scrubbing blood from the floor, repairing the broken windows with boards and canvas, restoring some semblance of order to the chaos of the previous night. The work was meditative, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed everything that had happened. Every time her thoughts drifted to the men she'd killed, she forced them back to practical concerns. Remorse was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Maybe not ever. By the time Caleb woke again, late afternoon sun was slanting through the repaired windows and the smell of cooking food filled the cabin. "You've been busy," he observed, his voice stronger than before. "Sitting still makes me think too much." Lena brought him a plate, small portions, easy to digest. "And thinking is dangerous right now." "What would you think about?" "Marcus Cole's face when I shot him. The sound my knife made going into that man's chest. The way their bodies looked when I rolled them into the ravine." She sat down across from him, forcing herself to eat despite the nausea churning in her stomach. "All the things I can't afford to feel guilty about, because feeling guilty means admitting I've become exactly what I was trying to escape." Caleb chewed slowly, watching her. "You think you've become like Cain?" "I think I've become a killer. Same as him, same as his men, same as—" She stopped herself. "Same as me? I didn't mean—" "It's a fair comparison." Caleb set down his fork, his meal only half finished. "We've both killed. Both justified it as necessary. Both carried the weight of those deaths afterward." He paused. "But there's a difference between us and men like Cain, Lena. We kill to protect. They kill to control. We take lives when there's no other choice. They take lives because it's convenient." "How do you know there was no other choice? How do you live with the uncertainty?" "I don't." The admission was stark, honest. "I live with the doubt every day, question every decision, every action, wonder if there was something I missed, some option I didn't see." He met her eyes. "But I also know that if I'd let Marcus Cole walk out of here with you, you'd be suffering something worse than death right now, and I'd have to live with that instead." Lena thought about Cain's reputation, about the stories she'd heard whispered among the girls in the brothel, stories of what happened to those who tried to leave, the creative and terrible punishments designed to serve as warnings to anyone else who might think freedom was possible. "You're right," she said quietly. Death would have been kinder. They ate in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. When the meal was finished, Lena cleaned up while Caleb dozed in the chair she'd helped him into. The movement from bed to chair had cost him. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the shallow way he breathed, but he'd insisted on getting up, on proving to himself that he was healing. Men and their stubborn pride. Even good men, apparently. As darkness fell, Lena moved to the window, watching the snow accumulate. It was beautiful in its way, this winter isolation. No people, no noise, no demands. Just the quiet rhythm of survival and the simple companionship of two people who understood what it meant to be broken. "Tell me about the Hendersons," she said, not turning from the window. "The people you're sending me to. John and Martha Henderson, ranchers, been working that valley for 20 years. Caleb's voice was warm with genuine affection. They're good people. Fair. They'll help you get north without asking questions you don't want to answer. How do you know them? John pulled me out of a river 6 years back. I'd been checking trap lines. Ice broke under me. Current had me. He heard me yelling, came running with a rope. Caleb shifted in the chair, trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. Spent 2 weeks at their place recovering. They never asked what I was doing out here alone, never pried into my history. Just helped because it needed doing. Seems like you collect people who help without asking for payment. Or maybe I'm just fortunate enough to cross paths with decent humans in an indecent world. He was quiet for a moment. Lena, when you get to the Henderson place, you should stay there, at least for a while. She turned from the window. What do you mean? I mean, running farther north might not be the answer. Sheridan, Miles City, even into Canada, Kane has connections everywhere. Money buys a long reach. Caleb's expression was serious. But a ranch in an isolated valley? Place where people mind their own business and strangers are rare? That might be the safest place for you. You want me to work for them? I want you to have a chance to figure out who you are when you're not running or surviving or fighting. He met her eyes. The Hendersons would take you in, give you honest work for honest pay. No expectations beyond what you agreed to. You could breathe. Figure out what comes next. The idea was tempting in a way that terrified her. Stay in one place. Put down roots, however shallow. Try to build something resembling a normal life. But normal was a luxury for people who weren't being hunted by men like Darius Kane. He won't stop looking, Lena said. You know that, right? Kane doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. Even if I hide at the Henderson Ranch for years, eventually someone will see me, recognize me, and word will get back. Maybe. Probably. Caleb's jaw set. But by then you'll be stronger, smarter, better prepared to handle whatever comes. Or I'll have gotten them killed for helping me. The Hendersons can handle trouble. John fought in the war, same as me. And Martha, Caleb's smile was grim. Let's just say she's put down more than one man who thought a woman alone at the ranch was an easy target. Before Lena could respond, a sound outside froze them both. Horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Caleb was on his feet instantly, the movement costing him dearly if the way he swayed was any indication. But his hands were steady as he grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber, and moved to the window. How many? Lena asked, the Colt already in her hand. Can't tell yet. At least 4, maybe more. Caleb's voice was tight with controlled tension. They're not being subtle about it either. That's either arrogance or overwhelming force. Lena joined him at the window, peering out into the darkness. Torches. She could see torches bobbing through the trees, their light reflecting off the snow in hellish flickers. Too many for another raid, Caleb muttered. This is something else. The riders emerged from the tree line, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. 10 men, maybe 12, all armed, all mounted on good horses, all carrying themselves with the casual confidence of people who knew they held every advantage. And at the front, riding a black stallion that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, was a man Lena recognized even at a distance. Darius Kane had come in person. He was younger than Lena remembered, mid-40s perhaps, with silver threading through his dark hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. He wore an expensive coat cut in the latest Eastern fashion, completely impractical for Wyoming winter, but making a statement about who owned enough power to ignore practicalities. The riders formed a loose semicircle around the cabin, torches held high, weapons visible, but not yet aimed. Kane sat his horse in the center, studying the cabin with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he'd stumbled across something interesting but ultimately unimportant. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the night, cultured, educated, with the faintest hint of a southern accent that generations of northern living hadn't quite erased. Mr. Rourke, I presume? I do apologize for the late hour, but I'm afraid we have business to conduct. Caleb didn't answer. His finger rested along the trigger guard of the Winchester, not on the trigger, but close. Kane smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. I see we're going to be difficult about this. Very well. Allow me to introduce myself properly. Darius Kane, proprietor of various enterprises in Cheyenne and elsewhere. And you, sir, are harboring property that belongs to me. People aren't property, Caleb said flatly. But see, that's where you're wrong. Miss Voss signed a contract, legally binding, I might add, witnessed by a notary and filed with the proper authorities. She agreed to work for me for a period of 7 years in exchange for room, board, and compensation. She's fulfilled barely 3 of those years and still owes me 4 more. Contracts signed under duress aren't valid. Can you prove duress, Mr. Rourke? Can Miss Voss testify that she was coerced rather than simply making a choice she later regretted? Kane's smile widened. I think we both know the answer to that. Lena felt sick. She'd signed that contract on her first day at Margaret's establishment, too naive to understand what she was agreeing to, too desperate for security to read the fine print. 7 years. She'd somehow forgotten about the full term in her desperation to escape. Even if the contract was valid, Caleb said, she's got the right to break it. Pay a penalty maybe, but she's got the right. Oh, absolutely. The penalty is clearly stated in Section 4, subsection 3. Kane pulled a folded document from his coat pocket, made a show of consulting it. Return of all compensation received plus 30% interest, calculated monthly. Let's see. 3 years at $200 per month base pay plus performance bonuses, housing value, clothing allowances, comes to approximately $9,000, plus the $300 she stole when she left. $9,000. Lena felt the number hit her like a physical blow. It might as well have been $9 million. She'd never see that kind of money in her entire life. Of course, Kane continued pleasantly, if she can't pay in currency, we can arrange alternative compensation. Another 3 years should about cover it, I think. She's not going back with you, Caleb said. Then she's in violation of a legal contract, which makes her a criminal. I have every right to pursue legal remedies, Kane gestured to his men. These gentlemen are all duly deputized by Judge Hammond in Cheyenne. We have warrants for Miss Voss's arrest and authorization to use necessary force to execute those warrants. The same Judge Hammond whose signature Marcus Cole forged yesterday? Kane's pleasant expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to. Marcus Cole was an employee of mine, but I can't be held responsible for his independent actions. Independent actions that involve tracking Lena here and trying to kill us both. If Marcus exceeded his authority, I sincerely apologize. However, that doesn't change the fundamental situation. Miss Voss violated her contract. She needs to return to Cheyenne to face the legal consequences. Kane leaned forward in his saddle. Now, we can do this the easy way. She comes out, we all ride back peacefully. No one else gets hurt. Or we can do it the hard way. What's the hard way? The hard way involves me burning this cabin to the ground with both of you inside it, then sifting through the ashes for Miss Voss's remains. Dead or alive, she returns to Cheyenne. Those are the only 2 options. Lena's hand tightened on the Colt. 12 men. She and Caleb had survived 5, but that had been blind luck and desperation. 12 was impossible odds, especially with Caleb wounded. How long do we have to decide? Caleb asked, his voice giving away nothing. I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Rourke. I'll give you 5 minutes to discuss this with Miss Voss and come to a sensible conclusion. Kane pulled out a pocket watch, checked it with theatrical precision. Starting now. Caleb stepped back from the window, pulling Lena with him. His face was grim, the set of his jaw suggesting he was running through options and finding them all wanting. We can't fight 12 men, Lena whispered. Even if you were healthy? We couldn't… I know. Then what do we do? Caleb was silent, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was low, urgent. There's a root cellar. Access through a trapdoor behind the cupboard. It leads to a tunnel that comes out about 50 yards away, hidden by brush. You want me to run? I want you to live. Caleb gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. You go through the tunnel, get to the barn, take the roan, ride west for the Henderson Ranch. Don't stop, don't look back. What about you? I'll buy you time. Hold them here, make them think you're still inside. They'll kill you. Probably. Caleb's smile was sad. But I've been dead for 16 years anyway. Might as well make it count for something. No. Lena pulled away from him, her voice firm. I'm not running anymore. I'm not letting another person die for me. Lena, I'm going out there. The words were out before she fully thought them through, but once spoken, they felt right. I'm going to surrender. Absolutely not. It's the only way we both survive this. Kane wants me, not you. I go with him. He leaves you alone. He'll kill you. Caleb's voice rose, urgent. Or worse, you know what he does to women who defy him. I know. Lena was surprised by how calm she felt, how clear everything suddenly seemed. But if I run now, he'll hunt me forever, and he'll kill everyone who helps me along the way. The Hendersons, anyone else I meet, anyone who shows me kindness. They'll all die because I was too afraid to face what I owe. You don't owe him anything. Maybe not, but I owe you a life. She touched his face gently, this hard, broken man who'd given her back her humanity. You saved me in that storm, fed me, healed me, fought for me. Let me return the favor. Let me save you this time. Outside, Kane's voice rang out. 2 minutes, Mr. Rourke. Caleb was shaking his head, his expression anguished. I can't let you do this. I can't. You don't get a vote. Lena moved to the door, the Colt still in her hand but pointed down. I'm making this choice. My choice. For the first time in 3 years, I'm choosing my own path. She opened the door before Caleb could stop her and stepped out into the torch-lit night. The cold hit Lena like a slap, but she barely felt it. Her entire focus was on Darius Kane, sitting astride his black stallion with the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything he truly wanted. The torchlight painted his features in sharp relief, handsome in a predatory way, like a wolf dressed in gentleman's clothing. Miss Voss, Kane's voice was warm, almost affectionate. How wonderful to see you looking so resilient. The storm didn't diminish your spirit, I see. Lena kept the Colt at her side, finger off the trigger but ready. I'm coming with you. I should hope so, though I must admit I'm surprised by your sudden cooperation. Kane's eyes flicked to the cabin behind her, where Caleb stood in the doorway, his rifle raised. What changed your mind? I don't want anyone else dying because of me. Ah, how noble. Kane's smile was patronizing. Though I wonder if Mr. Rourke agrees with your sacrifice? What I think doesn't matter, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the snow. She's made her choice. Indeed she has, though choices made under duress are rarely reliable, wouldn't you say? Kane studied them both, his expression thoughtful. Tell me, Miss Voss, are you surrendering because you truly believe it's the right thing to do? Or because Mr. Rourke is wounded and you know he can't protect you from 12 armed men? The question landed like a blade between Lena's ribs. Kane saw too much, understood too much. That had always been his greatest weapon. Not violence or money, but the ability to read people, to find their pressure points and exploit them with surgical precision. Does it matter? Lena asked. It matters to me. I prefer my employees to come willingly, you see, makes everything so much more pleasant. Kane dismounted with fluid grace, his boots crunching in the snow as he approached. His men shifted in their saddles, hands moving to weapons, but he waved them off. Please, Miss Voss and I are simply having a conversation. He stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to speak conversationally, but far enough to be outside easy pistol range. Up close, Lena could see the lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair catching the torchlight. He looked tired, she realized, tired and frustrated and operating on the edge of control. You've caused me considerable trouble, Lena. Kane's voice was conversational, but she heard the steel beneath. 5 men dead. Another fled back to Cheyenne with tales of demons and mountain men. My reputation has taken quite a blow. People are beginning to whisper that perhaps Darius Kane isn't as invincible as they thought. Good. Kane's smile disappeared. You think this is funny? You think defying me publicly is something to be proud of? I think standing up to you is the first honest thing I've done in 3 years. Honest? Kane laughed, the sound brittle. You want to talk about honesty? Let's be honest then. You weren't some innocent dove I corrupted. You came to Margaret's establishment of your own free will. You signed that contract knowing exactly what kind of work you were agreeing to. I was 17 and desperate. You were old enough to make choices and young enough to believe you deserved better than what you'd earned. Kane's voice hardened. I gave you luxury, safety, More money than you'd have seen in a lifetime of honest work. And you repaid that generosity by stealing from me and running away like a common thief. I didn't steal anything. $300 says otherwise. My head of security documented it personally. Kane pulled another paper from his coat. Though I'm prepared to be magnanimous. Return with me now, complete your contract, and I'll forgive the theft. We'll call it a misunderstanding. You'll even get to keep your old room, your old privileges. Lena felt sick. The old room, the gilded cage with silk sheets and crystal chandeliers, the place where she'd learned to smile while dying inside, to perform pleasure she never felt, to become whatever the paying customer wanted her to be. I'd rather die, she said quietly. That can be arranged. Kane's pleasantness evaporated like morning frost. But I'd prefer not to. You were popular, Lena, my best earner. Replacing you will cost me considerably more than the $9,000 you owe. Then consider it a bad investment. I don't make bad investments. I make corrections. Kane glanced back at his men, a silent signal. 3 of them dismounted, moving to flank him. Last chance. Come peacefully, or I'll have my men drag you back in chains, your choice. Behind her, Lena heard Caleb's Winchester click as he worked the action. She's not going anywhere. Mr. Rourke, please. We both know you can't win this fight. You're wounded, outnumbered, and defending someone who's legally bound to return with me. Kane's voice took on a reasonable tone, the kind used to talk down madmen from ledges. Why die for a woman you barely know? I'll even compensate you for your trouble, say $200 for your time and medical expenses. That's more than fair. Keep your money. $300 then, final offer. I said no. Kane's jaw tightened. You're a fool, Rourke. Whatever attachment you've formed to Miss Voss, I assure you it's not reciprocated. She's a whore. That's all she is, all she'll ever be. She's incapable of genuine feeling. They train it out of girls like her early. Whatever act she's put on for you, whatever tears or gratitude or promises, it's all performance. She's playing you. That's a lie, Lena said, her voice shaking with rage. Is it? Did you or did you not offer yourself to Mr. Rourke on your first night here? Did you not try to trade your body for shelter? Kane's smile was vicious. Don't bother denying it. I know how you think, Lena. I know every trick, every manipulation. You're a survivor, and survivors do whatever it takes, including seducing lonely mountain men stupid enough to believe they're saving someone. Caleb's voice cut through the accusations like a blade. She did offer, and I refused. Because unlike you, I don't measure a person's worth by what I can take from them. How enlightened. Kane's sarcasm was thick enough to choke on. And when she gets bored of playing damsel in distress, when she realizes you're just another man trying to control her, just with different methods, she'll run from you too, Rourke. It's what she does. Maybe, Caleb said, but that's her choice to make, not yours. The exchange was pushing Kane towards something dangerous. Lena could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. He was a man accustomed to control, to having his word be final. Every second of this conversation was an affront to his authority. Enough talk, Kane said abruptly. Miss Voss, you have 10 seconds to walk over here willingly. After that, my men will retrieve you by force. And Mr. Rourke, he drew his pistol, a beautiful Colt Peacemaker with ivory grips. After that, your interference becomes a legal matter. Lena looked back at Caleb. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the cabin's warm glow, his rifle steady despite the pain she knew he must be feeling. His eyes met hers across the distance, and in them she saw no judgment, no demands, just quiet acceptance of whatever choice she made. And in that moment, Lena understood something fundamental. For 3 years, men had told her who she was, what she was worth, what she owed. They'd defined her existence in terms of transactions and contracts and obligations that benefited everyone except her. But Caleb had never asked her to be anything except herself, had never demanded payment for his kindness, had given her the rarest gift imaginable, the freedom to choose. And now Kane was trying to take that freedom away again, to reduce her back to property, to something owned and controlled. She raised the Colt. Lena, Kane said warningly, don't be foolish. 1, she said, her voice steady. 2, 3. I'm giving you a direct order. 4, 5, 6. Lena's aim never wavered, the barrel pointed directly at Kane's chest. 7, 8, 9. You won't shoot me. You don't have the spine for it. 10. She pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, deliberately. The bullet whined past Kane's ear and buried itself in the snow behind him. His men reacted instantly, 12 rifles swinging up to aim at her, but Kane held up his hand, stopping them. His face had gone white, but his voice remained controlled. That was a mistake. No, Lena said. A mistake would have been believing I'm still the broken girl you remember. But that girl died in this storm, Kane. What's left is someone who'd rather die on her feet than live on her knees. Touching sentiment, it won't stop 12 rifles from cutting you down. Maybe not, but I'll take you with me. I might not be a great shot, but at this range even I can hit something vital. Lena's hands were shaking, but she kept the Colt trained on Kane. So here's my offer. You turn around, take your men, and ride back to Cheyenne. Forget I exist. Forget this cabin exists. Just leave. Kane stared at her for a long moment, genuine surprise flickering across his features. Then he laughed. A real laugh this time, not the calculated performance he'd been using. You've changed, he said, something like respect coloring his voice. I almost believe you'd do it. Almost believe you've got the nerve to pull that trigger with my men ready to end you. Try me. No, I don't think I will. Kane holstered his pistol with deliberate slowness. Not because I'm afraid of you, understand, but because I'm curious to see how this plays out. He glanced at his men, then back to Lena. You think running farther will save you? You think hiding in the mountains will make you free? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Fair enough. Kane remounted his stallion, the movement fluid despite the tension. But understand this, Lena, I'm a businessman. I don't chase bad investments forever. You've cost me too much already in men and reputation, so I'm going to make this simple. He pulled out a pocket watch, checked it. You have 48 hours, 2 days to get as far from here as you can. After that, I'm putting a bounty on your head. $500 to whoever brings you back to Cheyenne. Dead or alive, I'm not particular anymore. Every bounty hunter, every desperate cowhand, every two-bit criminal from here to the Canadian border will be looking for you. Why give me any time at all? Call it professional courtesy. You showed spine standing up to me like this. I respect that, even if it inconveniences me. Kane gathered his reins. Besides, it makes the hunt more interesting. 48 hours, Lena. Use them wisely. He wheeled the stallion around, his men following suit. But before they disappeared into the darkness, Kane looked back one more time. And Mr. Rourke, next time you interfere in my business, there won't be any conversation, just consequences. Then they were gone, torches bobbing away through the trees, leaving Lena standing in the snow with a smoking pistol and the first real taste of agency she'd had in years. Her legs gave out. She went down hard, the Colt tumbling from nerveless fingers. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation drained away all at once, leaving her shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Caleb was there instantly, dropping to his knees beside her despite the obvious pain it caused. Easy. You're all right. You did it. You faced him down. I almost killed him, Lena whispered. I wanted to. My finger was on the trigger, and I wanted to so badly. But you didn't. Only because I knew his men would kill us both. Not because it was wrong, not because I'm better than that. She looked up at Caleb, tears streaming down her face. What does that make me? Human. Caleb helped her stand, supporting most of her weight. It makes you human, Lena. Angry and scared and trying to survive in a world that's done nothing but hurt you. That's not evil. That's just being alive. They made it back to the cabin somehow, stumbling through the door and collapsing inside. Caleb's wound had reopened. Lena could see fresh blood soaking through his bandages, but he waved off her concern. Later. Right now we need to think. He sank into a chair, breathing hard. 48 hours. That's not much time. Time for what? To get you somewhere safe. Henderson's ranch is too close. Bounty hunters will check there first. We need to think bigger. We? Lena stared at him. Caleb, You can't come with me. You're wounded. You barely survived tonight, which is exactly why you need someone who can fight alongside you. Caleb's expression was stubborn. You think I'm letting you face bounty hunters alone? After everything? You've already done enough, more than enough. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. He stood with effort, moving to the cupboard where he kept maps. There's a mining camp in Montana. 3 weeks' ride, assuming the weather holds. Remote enough that strangers stand out, which means bounty hunters can't operate quietly. We get you there. Set you up with new identity, new story. And what story explains you? What explains a mountain man traveling with a woman running from the law? Caleb spread the map on the table, his fingers tracing routes. We're married. Heading to Montana to stake a claim. You're my wife, I'm your husband, and anyone who questions that story gets introduced to my rifle. The word wife hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to examine. That won't work, Lena said quietly. People will know. One look at us, and they'll know it's not real. Why? Because I don't know how to be a wife. Don't know how to be anything except what Cain made me. The admission hurt, scraping raw against truths she'd been avoiding. I can perform being whatever a man wants, can smile and flirt and make them believe I'm interested. But real partnership, real connection without transaction, I don't even know what that looks like. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, studying the map without really seeing it. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. When Sarah Chen found me in that Denver alley, I told her I didn't know how to be anything except a killer. Said the war had broken something fundamental in me, that I'd never be fit for normal life. He looked up, meeting Lena's eyes. You know what she said? What? She said being broken just means you've survived something that should have destroyed you, and surviving means you're stronger than you know. Caleb's hand found hers on the table. You've been a survivor your whole life, Lena. Time you learned to be something more. Like what? Like free. Like your own person, making your own choices. Like someone who doesn't measure her worth by what she can give to men who take everything. His grip tightened. You stood up to Cain tonight. Faced down the man who owned you and told him no. That's not performance. That's real. Lena wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that the woman who'd faced Cain in the snow was her true self rather than just another survival mechanism. But years of conditioning ran deep, and hope felt dangerous. What if I can't do it? She whispered. What if we get to Montana and I'm still just broken? Then we figure it out together. But I'm betting on you, Lena Voss. I'm betting you're stronger and braver than you think, and I'm willing to stake my life on that bet. The weight of his faith in her was almost crushing. This man who barely knew her, who had every reason to cut his losses and let her run alone, was offering to risk everything on the possibility that she could become something more than her past. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin. Somewhere in the darkness, bounty hunters were already preparing. 48 hours was nothing, barely enough time to rest, resupply, and plan a route that might keep them ahead of the hunters. But as Lena looked at the map, at the long journey north marked in Caleb's careful hand, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, not quite, but something close, something that whispered maybe. Maybe she could outrun her past. Maybe she could become someone new. Maybe freedom was possible if she was willing to fight for it. Montana then, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. 3 weeks if the weather holds. 3 weeks, Caleb agreed. He was swaying on his feet, the night's exertion finally catching up to him. But first we both need rest. Real rest. Can't run if we're half dead. Lena helped him back to the bed, changed his bandages with hands that were steadier now, competent from repetition. The wound was bad, but not fatal. He'd survive if they were careful, if they didn't push too hard too fast. Sleep, she ordered, tucking blankets around him. I'll keep watch. Wake me in 4 hours. We'll switch. We'll see. Caleb's eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling him under. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Lena settled into the chair by the window, the Colt in her lap, and watched the darkness. The cabin felt different now. Not a shelter, but a waypoint. A brief respite on a longer journey. In 2 days, they'd leave this place, head north into unknown territory pursued by men who killed for money. The smart thing would be to run alone. Leave Caleb here to heal, take the roan and whatever supplies she could carry, and disappear into the wilderness. It would be safer for him. Safer for both of them, really. But the thought of leaving him, of facing what came next without his steady presence and hard-earned wisdom, felt like another kind of death. Somewhere along the way, between the storm and the shooting and the blood, she'd stopped thinking of Caleb as just her rescuer. He'd become something more complicated. Partner, maybe. Friend, certainly. And possibly, terrifyingly, the first person in years who made her want to be better than survival required. The night deepened. Stars emerged as the clouds cleared, brilliant and cold against the winter sky. Lena watched them through the window, thinking about maps and journeys and the long road to freedom. 48 hours until the bounty went out. Then every desperate man in Wyoming would be hunting her, driven by the promise of $500 and the knowledge that Darius Kane's word was law. But she wouldn't be running alone this time. And that, more than any weapon or plan or head start, gave her the first real chance at survival she'd had since the night she broke that window and ran. Dawn came gray and cold, painting the snow in shades of pearl. Lena dozed in the chair, jerking awake at every sound, her hand never far from the Colt. When light finally filled the cabin, she found Caleb awake and watching her. "You didn't wake me," he said. "You needed rest more than I did." Stubborn? Takes one to know one. Lena stood, stretching muscles that screamed protest. "How's the wound?" "Hurts like hell, but I'll manage." Caleb sat up slowly, testing his limits. "We should leave by nightfall. Gives us the cover of darkness for the first few miles." "Can you ride?" "I've ridden with worse." He swung his legs off the bed, stood with visible effort. "Get some sleep, Lena. Real sleep. I'll pack supplies, prep the horses. When you wake up, we ride." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could help, but exhaustion was a weight she couldn't fight anymore. She made it to the bed before her legs gave out, and sleep claimed her before her head fully hit the pillow. She dreamed of running through endless snow, pursued by shadows with Darius Kane's face. Dreamed of reaching for something just beyond her grasp, some promise of safety that always retreated as she approached. And through it all, a steady voice that sounded like Caleb's, saying the same words over and over. "You're stronger than you know." When she woke, the cabin was dim with late afternoon light. Caleb had been busy, supplies were packed, weapons cleaned and loaded, the horses saddled and ready. He'd even prepared food for the journey, simple but nourishing fare that would keep them going through hard travel. "Time to go," he said when he saw her stirring. Lena rose, dressed in the warmest clothes they'd assembled, and checked her weapons one final time. The Colt, freshly loaded, the bone-handled knife cleaned of blood and sharp enough to split hairs, and somewhere deeper, the hard core of determination that had carried her through the storm and the violence and the terrible choices. They stepped out into the fading light, leading the horses toward whatever waited beyond the familiar boundaries of this small sanctuary. Behind them, the cabin stood silent and empty, windows dark, door closed against the cold. Ahead lay 3 weeks of hard riding, pursued by men who would kill for money and glory. 3 weeks to reach Montana and whatever uncertain future waited there. But for the first time since she could remember, Lena wasn't facing that future alone. And somehow, impossibly, that made all the difference. The horses' breath came in white clouds as they climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the cabin behind. Lena rode the roan mare Caleb had promised her, the animal responding to her inexperienced handling with patient tolerance. Caleb led on his gray gelding, setting a pace that was steady but not punishing, mindful of his wound and the long journey ahead. They rode in silence through the first hour, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft crunch of hooves in snow. The landscape around them was brutal in its beauty. Endless white interrupted only by dark fingers of pine, mountains rising like ancient sentinels against a sky that threatened more snow. As darkness settled over the high country, Caleb pulled up near a stand of trees that offered some shelter from the wind. "We'll camp here. Can't risk a fire. Smoke carries too far in cold air. But we can rest the horses, eat something." Lena dismounted stiffly, her legs protesting hours in the saddle. "How far have we come?" "Maybe 8 miles. Not enough, but pushing harder would kill the horses. Caleb was already seeing to the animals, his movements economical despite visible pain. We'll make better time tomorrow when we hit the old trapper trails. They ate cold food huddled in their coats, sharing body heat against the brutal temperature. Lena had never known cold like this. The storm that had driven her to Caleb's cabin had been furious but brief. This was different. This was cold that settled into your bones and promised to stay, cold that reminded you how fragile human life was against the indifference of nature. "Tell me about Montana," she said, needing to hear something other than wind and her own dark thoughts. "The mining camp you mentioned? Silver Bend. Started about 5 years ago when they found a decent vein. Couple hundred people now, maybe more." Caleb chewed jerky methodically. "It's rough living, mostly men, mostly desperate. But there's work if you're willing. Cooking, laundry, running a boarding house. Honest work that doesn't require questions about where you came from. And you think I can just become someone else? Pretend the last 3 years never happened? I think you can become whoever you choose to be. Past doesn't have to define you unless you let it." He glanced at her in the darkness. "I was a killer, Lena. Took lives in the name of causes I stopped believing in halfway through the war. For years I thought that's all I'd ever be. The sum of my worst actions. Then Sarah showed me different. Showed me that people can change if they're willing to do the work." "What kind of work?" "The hard kind. Looking at yourself honest, acknowledging what you've done and what's been done to you. Then making different choices, one day at a time, until those choices become habits and habits become character." Caleb's voice carried the weight of experience. "It's not fast and it's not easy, but it's possible." Lena thought about the woman she'd been in Cheyenne, performing desire she didn't feel, smiling at men who saw her as property, slowly dying inside while pretending to live. Then she thought about the woman who'd faced Darius Kane with a loaded pistol, who'd dragged bodies to a ravine, who'd chosen to fight rather than surrender. "I don't know if I can be normal," she admitted. "Don't know if I remember how." "Normal's overrated anyway. Aim for honest instead. Honest with yourself, honest about what you want, honest about who you're becoming." Caleb shifted, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his wound. "Everything else is just details." They took turns sleeping, 2 hours each, while the other kept watch. When dawn came gray and reluctant, they were already moving, pushing north through country that grew progressively more desolate. The second day passed in a blur of cold and exhaustion. They saw no one. The high country was empty this time of year, too brutal for even the hardiest trappers. That isolation was both blessing and curse. No one to report their passage, but also no one to help if something went wrong. On the third day, Caleb's fever returned. Lena noticed it first in the way he swayed in the saddle, catching himself with visible effort. By noon, he was barely staying upright, his face flushed despite the cold, his breathing labored. "We need to stop," Lena said, pulling alongside him. "Can't. Need to keep moving." "Caleb, you're burning up. The wound's infected." "I know." His voice was distant, focused inward on just staying conscious. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead. Old trapper cabin. We can hole up there. Deal with it." 5 miles might as well have been 50. Twice Caleb nearly fell from the saddle, and only Lena's quick reflexes kept him mounted. When they finally reached the shack, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, he collapsed the moment his feet hit the ground. Lena dragged him inside, got him onto the single bunk that occupied one corner, and tore open his shirt to examine the wound. What she saw made her stomach clench with fear. The stitches had held, but the skin around them was angry red, hot to the touch, and weeping fluid that smelled of corruption. The infection was serious, possibly fatal if she didn't do something fast. She built a fire in the ancient stove, melting snow for water, going through mental inventory of the medical supplies they'd brought. Not much. Some bandages, the grain alcohol, needle, and thread. Nothing specifically meant to fight infection. "Caleb," she shook his shoulder gently. "I need to clean this wound again. It's going to hurt." His eyes opened, fever bright and unfocused. "Do it." The alcohol did its work with brutal efficiency. Caleb's back arched, a strangled sound escaping through his clenched teeth, but he didn't pull away. Lena cleaned the wound as thoroughly as she dared, removing the old stitches, clearing out infected tissue, then stitching it closed again with trembling hands. When she finished, she wrapped fresh bandages around his midsection and covered him with every blanket they had. Then she sat beside the bunk, watching his chest rise and fall, praying to forces she wasn't sure she believed in that he'd survive this. The fever climbed through the night. Caleb thrashed and muttered, lost in nightmares Lena couldn't reach. She bathed his face with cool water, tried to get him to drink, and listened to him relive battles from a war that ended before she was born. "Sarah," he whispered at one point, his hand reaching for something only he could see. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Couldn't save them. Couldn't save anyone." "It's okay," Lena murmured, taking his hand. "You're okay. I'm here." "Lena?" He focused on her with effort. "Did we make it, Montana?" "Not yet. We're in a line shack. You're sick, but you're going to be fine." Liar. His smile was weak. Always been a terrible liar. "Then I'll tell you the truth. I'm terrified. I don't know what I'm doing, don't know if these stitches will hold, don't know how to save you." The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "But I'm not leaving. I'm not running. Whatever happens, you don't face it alone." Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. "Strongest person I've ever met," he whispered. "Braver than any soldier. You'll be fine, Lena, with or without me." "Don't say that. Don't you dare give up." "Not giving up, just acknowledging reality." His breathing was shallow, labored. "If something happens, you take both horses. Head northwest. 3 days, you'll hit the Jefferson River. Follow it north to Silver Bend. Tell them you're my widow. They'll help." "Stop talking like you're dying. Just being practical." Caleb's eyes were closing again. "Someone taught me that once. Smart woman. Saved my life in more ways than one." He drifted back into fevered sleep, leaving Lena alone with her fear and the howling wind outside. The night stretched endless. Lena dozed in fits, jerking awake at every sound, checking Caleb's breathing, monitoring his fever. Somewhere around dawn, when she'd almost convinced herself he wouldn't survive, the fever broke. She woke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You stayed," he said, his voice hoarse but lucid. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I go? Smart woman would have taken the supplies and run, got herself to safety while she had the chance. Then I guess I'm not that smart." Lena pressed her hand to his forehead, still warm but no longer dangerously hot. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses and left for dead." "So, better than yesterday." He tried to sit up and managed about 6 inches before falling back. "How long was I out?" 2 days. "We've been here 2 days. Caleb's expression darkened. "That's 4 days since Kane's deadline. The bounty's active." "I know. We need to move. Soon as I can ride." "You can't ride. Not yet. Another day at least, maybe 2. Lena stood, moving to prepare food. "And before you argue, remember I'm the one who's been keeping you alive, so you'll listen to me for once." To her surprise, Caleb smiled. "Yes, ma'am." They stayed in the line shack for 3 more days while Caleb regained enough strength to travel. Lena hunted rabbits with Caleb's rifle, surprised to discover she had some aptitude for it. She also kept watch, scanning the surrounding country for any sign of pursuit. On the 6th day, they saw smoke on the horizon. "Riders," Caleb said, peering through a crack in the wall. 3, maybe 4. Could be innocent travelers. Or bounty hunters who picked up our trail. "Yes, Caleb was already moving, gathering weapons with movements that were steadier now but still careful. "We can't outrun them, not with me like this. We'll have to fight if they're coming for you." Lena checked the Colt, her hands steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "How do we know if they're hunters?" "We wait and see if they come here. This shack's the only shelter for miles. If they're tracking us, they'll check it." They waited in tense silence as the riders approached. Lena could make out details now. 4 men, heavily armed, moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who knew exactly where they were going. "Hunters," Caleb said quietly. "They've got our trail." The men pulled up about 50 yards from the shack, spreading out in a tactical formation that spoke of military experience. One of them, older, grizzled, with a face like leather left too long in the sun, called out, "Anyone in there? Best come out peaceable. We're looking for a woman, About 5'4", dark hair. Got a legal warrant for her arrest. Caleb met Lena's eyes. Your call. We can try to talk or we can fight. Lena thought about Kane's promise, about the $500 that had turned her into prey, about all the desperate men who would keep coming as long as that bounty stood. I'm tired of running, she said. I'm tired of being hunted. I'm tired of men treating me like property they can buy and sell. What do you want to do? She moved to the door, Caleb positioning himself to cover her with the rifle. I want to end this, permanently. Lena stepped outside, the Colt at her side but visible. The four men immediately drew their weapons, but she raised her free hand in a gesture of peace. I'm Lena Voss, she called out. You're looking for me. The grizzled man nudged his horse forward a few steps. Come with us peaceful and nobody gets hurt. Fight, and we'll take you anyway, just less comfortable. I've got a question first. How much is Darius Kane paying? 500, same as the posters say. What if I offered you more to leave me alone? The man laughed. You got more than $500 on you, sweetheart? No, but I've got something worth more than money. I've got information. Lena kept her voice steady, projecting confidence she didn't feel. Information about Darius Kane's operations, his suppliers, his routes, his payoffs to lawmen and judges, everything he's built in Cheyenne over the past 15 years. The laughter stopped. Why would you have that? Because I worked for him for 3 years. Because I was kept in his private suite where he conducted business. Because men talk in front of whores like we're furniture, and they never think we're listening. Lena took a calculated risk. And because I kept notes, dates, names, amounts, everything I could remember, written down and hidden where Kane can't find it. It was a complete lie. She'd kept no such records, had nothing to offer except the information in her head. But she saw the flicker of interest in the lead hunter's eyes, saw him calculating. Even if that's true, he said slowly, what good does it do us? Take that information to the federal marshals in Helena. Kane's been operating across territorial lines. That's federal jurisdiction. The marshals have been trying to build a case against him for years, but they need proof. Lena stepped forward, gambling everything on this desperate bluff. You give them that proof. There's rewards. Real rewards. Not just bounty money. Plus, you'd be taking down one of the most powerful criminals in Wyoming. Or we could just collect the 500 and be done with it. You could, but Kane's bounty expires the second you deliver me. The federal reward for his arrest? That's permanent. And it's for everyone who helps bring him down. She could see them wavering, greed warring with caution. You really want to settle for 500 split 4 ways when you could be heroes who took down Darius Kane? The men conferred in low voices, their horses stamping impatiently. Lena waited, her heart hammering, aware of Caleb behind her with the rifle ready to turn this into a bloodbath if negotiations failed. Finally, the grizzled man turned back. Show us these notes. We see them. We'll consider your offer. They're not here. They're hidden back at the cabin where I was staying. Take me back there. I'll give them to you. Another lie, but she was committed now. That cabin's 6 days' ride from here. Then we'd better get moving. More conferring. Then, to Lena's surprise, the leader nodded. All right, but we're watching you close. Any tricks? Any attempts to escape? We collect Kane's bounty the hard way. Understood? Understood. The men dismounted, clearly settling in to wait while Lena gathered her things. She ducked back into the shack where Caleb waited, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. What the hell are you doing? He whispered urgently. Buying us time. Maybe buying us a way out of this entirely. She started packing with quick, efficient movements. You go northwest to Silver Bend like you planned. I'll lead them back to your cabin. Absolutely not. I'm not letting you face 4 armed men alone. You don't have a choice. You can barely ride and you'll slow me down. Lena gripped his arms, forcing him to meet her eyes. This is my fight now, Caleb. My choice. Let me make it. There are no notes. You can't give them what doesn't exist. Then I'll improvise. Tell them what I remember. Make it sound official enough that they believe it. She was already moving, checking weapons, preparing for whatever came next. If I'm lucky, they'll take the information and leave. If not, well, I've survived worse odds than 4 to 1. Lena, you've spent days teaching me to fight, to shoot, to survive. She touched his face gently. Trust that those lessons took. Trust me. Outside, one of the hunters called impatiently. Time's up, lady. We leaving or not? Lena moved to the door, then paused, looking back at Caleb one final time. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it to Silver Bend, thank you. For everything. For showing me I was worth saving. You'll make it. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. And when you do, I'll be waiting. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that somewhere in the chaos and violence of the past week, she'd started to believe in the possibility of becoming someone new, someone strong, someone free. But the hunters were waiting, and words felt inadequate anyway. Lena stepped outside, mounted the roan mare, and rode away from the line shack without looking back. Behind her, Caleb watched from the doorway, his rifle ready but unused, his faith in her the heaviest and most precious burden she'd ever carried. The journey back toward the cabin took 5 brutal days. The hunters kept her on a short leash, never close enough to talk comfortably, never far enough to run. At night they tied her hands, though not cruelly, and set watches to ensure she didn't escape. On the 3rd day, the grizzled leader, his name was Mackenzie, she'd learned, rode alongside her. You really got information worth federal attention? He asked. I do. Specific enough to build a case? Dates, locations, amounts, names of every lawman on Kane's payroll, every politician he's bought, shipment schedules for the opium he brings in from California, everything. The lies came easier now, built on fragments of truth she'd overheard during her time in Cheyenne. Mackenzie was quiet, considering, why not go to the marshals yourself? Why run at all? Because Kane owns half the law in Wyoming. Going to local authorities would have gotten me killed. And I needed distance, needed to survive long enough that federal marshals could protect me. Lena glanced at him. You understand that, don't you? That sometimes running is the only option? I understand survival. Mackenzie's expression was thoughtful. I also understand desperation. You're gambling everything on a promise you might not be able to keep. I know, but it's my gamble to make. They reached the cabin on the evening of the 5th day, riding up through familiar country that felt like visiting a graveyard. The cabin stood empty, snow piled against the door, windows dark and dead. This is it? Mackenzie dismounted, studying the place with professional skepticism. This is where you've been hiding? This is where Caleb Rourke sheltered me. Where I kept the notes. Lena slid from the roan's back, every muscle screaming protest. Give me a minute, I'll get them. She pushed open the cabin door, stepping into space that held too many memories. The fireplace where Caleb had first helped her warm, frozen feet. The bed where she'd slept while he stood guard. The floor where she'd killed a man who tried to strangle her. The hunters crowded in behind her, weapons drawn, clearly expecting some kind of trick. Well? Mackenzie demanded. Where are they? Lena moved to the loose floorboard near the fireplace. The one Caleb had shown her held emergency supplies. She pried it up, reached into the space beneath, and felt her fingers close around something that shouldn't be there. A leather journal wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. She pulled it out with shaking hands, her mind reeling. She hadn't left this here. Couldn't have. It hadn't existed when she and Caleb fled this place, which meant Caleb had come back. While she was unconscious, recovering, he'd taken the time to create exactly what she'd promised these men. She opened the journal and saw his careful handwriting, pages filled with names and dates and details that looked official and damning. Information he must have gathered over years of listening to travelers, trappers, traders who passed through this high country. All of it organized into something that resembled evidence. He'd given her a way out. Even knowing he might never see her again, he'd given her the tools to survive. Well? Mackenzie's impatience was growing. That it? Lena closed the journal, held it against her chest. This is everything. Names, dates, everything you need to bring down Kane's operation. Mackenzie took it, flipped through pages, his expression growing progressively more interested. If this is accurate, if even half of this checks out, it's accurate. I lived it. Lena met his eyes. So do we have a deal? You take this to the federal marshals, leave me out of it. The 4 hunters conferred again, passing the journal between them, studying Caleb's careful documentation. Finally, Mackenzie looked up, something like respect in his weathered features. We got a deal, but you need to come with us to Helena. Make a statement to the marshals. They'll want to verify some of this information, and you're the only witness who can. Will they protect me? Federal marshals? Yeah, they'll keep you safe from Kane long enough to testify. After that, he shrugged. After that, you're free to disappear wherever you want. It wasn't perfect. It meant more risk, more exposure, more time spent looking over her shoulder. But it was better than running forever, better than living as hunted prey. All right, Lena said. Helena it is. The journey to Helena took 2 weeks, pushing through country that grew progressively more civilized as they descended from the high mountains. They passed farms, small settlements, places where people lived normal lives unmarked by violence or desperation. Lena watched it all with a strange detachment, unable to imagine herself fitting into that kind of normalcy. She'd been changed too fundamentally by everything that had happened, by Kane and Cheyenne, by the storm and Caleb's cabin, by the violence and the choices that had transformed her from victim to survivor. The federal marshals in Helena were exactly what Mackenzie had promised: professional, thorough, and completely unimpressed by Darius Kane's reputation. They took Lena's statement over 3 long days, verifying details against Caleb's journal, building a case that grew stronger with each new piece of corroborating evidence. "This is good work," Marshal Hartley told her on the 3rd day, reviewing his notes. "If half of what you and this journal claim is true, we've got Kane on federal racketeering charges, interstate trafficking, corruption of public officials. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. If you can catch him." "Oh, we'll catch him. Already sent men to Cheyenne with arrest warrants. Kane thinks he's untouchable, which makes him careless." Hartley studied her with sharp eyes. "Question is, what happens to you after we bring him in?" "I disappear. Become someone else somewhere else. That was the deal." "It was. But I'm wondering if you'd consider staying on as a federal witness. We've got a dozen other cases we could build with someone who knows the inside of Kane's operation." The offer was tempting in its own way: purpose, protection, a chance to actively dismantle the empire that had enslaved her. But Lena shook her head. "I've testified. I've given you everything I know. Now I want to live my own life, whatever that looks like." Hartley nodded, unsurprised. "Fair enough. Just know the offer stands if you change your mind." He stood, extending his hand. "You're free to go, Miss Voss. And for what it's worth, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met." Lena shook his hand, accepted the compliment she didn't feel she'd earned, and walked out of the federal building into bright Montana sunshine. She had money now. Mackenzie and his men had split their reward for the information with her, insisting over her protests. $300. Enough to start over somewhere, to buy new clothes and a ticket to wherever she wanted to go. But there was only one place she wanted to be. Silver Bend was exactly as Caleb had described: rough and ready, a collection of buildings clinging to mountainsides honeycombed with silver mines. The streets were mud and noise, the people hard-bitten and suspicious of strangers. Lena found a boarding house run by a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions beyond whether Lena could pay in advance. She rented a room, cleaned herself up properly for the first time in weeks, and went looking for work. The saloon owner needed someone to manage his kitchen. The general store needed help with inventory. The doctor's wife needed someone to assist with nursing and midwifery. Lena took all 3 jobs, working 16-hour days that left her exhausted but satisfied in a way she'd never been in Cheyenne. This was honest work, freely chosen, with payment that wasn't degrading or shameful. Weeks turned into months. Summer arrived, melting the snow and transforming Silver Bend into a muddy chaos of mining claims and speculation. Lena worked, saved money, and slowly began to believe that maybe, possibly, she could build a life here. But every day she watched the trails leading into town, waiting for a tall figure on a gray gelding. Caleb didn't come. She tried not to let it bother her, tried to tell herself he'd moved on with his life the same way she was building hers. He owed her nothing. Their partnership had been born of necessity and crisis, not anything lasting. But the disappointment sat heavy in her chest anyway. Then one evening in late July, as Lena was closing the general store, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Here you've become quite the pillar of the community." She spun around, her heart leaping, to find Caleb leaning against the doorframe. He looked thinner than she remembered, favoring his left side slightly, but his eyes were clear and his smile was genuine. "You came," she whispered. "Told you I'd be waiting, didn't I?" Caleb stepped inside and Lena saw he moved with new ease, the wound finally healed. "Just took me a while to tie up loose ends, sold the cabin and trap lines. Figured I didn't need them anymore." "Why not?" "Because I realized something while you were gone. That cabin was a place to hide, not a place to live. And I'm tired of hiding." He closed the distance between them, his expression serious. "Heard about what you did in Helena, how you brought down Kane's empire. Federal marshals arrested him 2 months ago, trial set for September." "I heard." Lena couldn't look away from him. "They say he'll hang." "Good. No sympathy, no regret. World's better without men like him in it." They stood in the dimming light of the general store, two damaged people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow survived to see better days. "What now?" Lena asked finally. "For you, I mean. What do you do now that you've stopped hiding?" "I was hoping you might help me figure that out." Caleb's smile was tentative. "See, I've got some money from selling the cabin, and I've got skills, carpentry, hunting, basic medicine. Seems to me a town like Silver Bend could use someone like that. Maybe building things instead of destroying them for a change." "You're staying. If you'll have me. Not because I expect anything," he added quickly. "Just as friends, partners maybe. Two people helping each other figure out how to be human again." Lena thought about the journey that had brought them here. The storm and the violence, the fear and the courage, the terrible choices and the hard-won freedom. Thought about the woman she'd been when she knocked on Caleb's door, broken and desperate and convinced she had no value. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd faced down her demons and survived. Someone who understood that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing who you became despite it. "Partners," she agreed, extending her hand. "Friends? We'll figure out the rest as we go." Caleb took her hand, his grip warm and solid and real. "Deal." That night they had dinner at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen serving them with barely concealed curiosity about this stranger who'd brought the first genuine smile to Lena's face since she'd arrived in Silver Bend. They talked about everything and nothing, the town's growth, the latest mining strikes, the weather and work, and all the mundane concerns of people building ordinary lives. And for the first time since she could remember, Lena felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Not for some grand future or dramatic transformation, but for simple, steady existence. For work, and friendship, and the possibility that maybe, eventually, she could become the person she'd always been meant to be. The summer stretched on. Caleb found work building new structures for the expanding town. Lena continued her 3 jobs, saving money with vague plans to eventually open her own boarding house. They fell into an easy rhythm, dinners together, occasional rides into the surrounding country, conversations that ranged from shallow to profound and back again. People in Silver Bend assumed they were married, and neither bothered to correct the assumption. It was easier, safer, and oddly comfortable to be seen as a respectable couple rather than 2 lone survivors orbiting each other. In September, word came that Darius Kane had been convicted on all federal charges, sentenced to life in a territorial prison, his empire dismantled, his assets seized and distributed to his victims. Lena felt nothing when she heard the news. No satisfaction, no closure. Kane was just part of a past that felt increasingly distant, increasingly irrelevant to the life she was building. On a cold October evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Lena and Caleb sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the mountains turn white. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked quietly. "Helping me, I mean. All the trouble it caused you?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, considering. "No. Best thing I ever did, pulling you out of that storm. Gave me a reason to be more than just a ghost haunting an empty cabin. I'm still figuring out who I am without Kane defining me." "That's fair? I spent 16 years figuring out who I was without the war defining me." He turned to look at her, his expression gentle. "But I'll tell you what I learned. You're not what was done to you. You're what you choose to do next." "And what do I choose?" "Whatever you want. That's the whole point of freedom, Lena. You get to decide. She thought about that as the snow continued to fall, blanketing Silver Bend in clean white silence. Thought about the choices she'd made. To run, to fight, to survive, to build something new. Thought about the woman she was becoming, still broken in places but healing, still scared but getting braver, still uncertain but learning to trust in her own strength. I choose this, she said finally. This town, this work, this partnership or friendship or whatever we're calling it. Sounds good to me. They sat together as darkness fell, two survivors finding peace in simple companionship. The Wyoming wind that had once hunted Lena with such fury now just whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of winter, but also the certainty of spring to come. Months turned into years. Silver Bend grew from a rough mining camp into a proper town. Lena eventually opened her boarding house, running it with a firm hand and a reputation for fairness that drew steady business. Caleb built half the new structures in town, his carpentry skills in constant demand. They married properly after 2 years, not because convention demanded it, but because they wanted to. Because the partnership they'd built in crisis had transformed into something deeper, something that didn't require dramatic declarations or grand gestures, just steady presence, mutual respect, and the understanding that they'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. On their 5th anniversary, Lena stood on the porch of the boarding house she now owned, watching Caleb work on an addition to the building. The muscles of his back moved under his shirt, and she could still see the scar from the knife wound that had nearly killed him. He caught her watching and grinned. "See something you like, Mrs. Rourke?" The name still felt strange sometimes. Not Voss, not the manufactured identity she'd carried in Cheyenne, but Rourke, a name earned through survival and choice rather than birth or assignment. "Just thinking," she called back. "About what?" "About storms, and how sometimes the things that should destroy us end up saving us instead." Caleb set down his tools and crossed to where she stood, pulling her into an embrace that was comfortable and familiar and real. "You saved yourself, Lena. I just gave you a place to be while you figured out how." She leaned into his strength, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about the girl who'd stumbled out of a Wyoming storm with nothing left to lose. That girl was gone, transformed by fire and blood and the hard work of choosing to become someone new. In her place stood a woman who owned her own business, who helped her community, who'd built a life worth living. A woman who understood that freedom wasn't something given but something fought for, one small choice at a time. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow and the vast Wyoming sky. But this time, Lena didn't flinch, didn't fear, because she knew now what she hadn't known in that desperate flight through the storm, that she was stronger than any wind, any winter, any man who thought he could own her. She was free, and that freedom, hard-won and fiercely protected, was worth everything she'd endured to claim it.